The Obsidian Fleet. A shroud of umbral warships, the Obsidian Fleet, hung suspended in the ether, a million hulls, each bristling with formidable armaments, comprised the Xylar Imperium's rapacious appetite, awaiting Admiral Zorgan's signal to the Armada's core. The Dominator, Zorgan's flagship, throbbed with restrained ferocity, its bridge a dazzling spectacle of holographic displays intermingled with the low thrum of mounting tension. Before his command staff, Zorgan's draconic gaze swept across their assembled faces, his booming voice, amplified through the ship's network, echoed with icy authority. Across eons, he proclaimed, we've imposed order upon chaos, delivered illumination where darkness reigned, we have subdued constellations, crushed defiance, and built an empire spanning galaxies. Today, we stand upon the threshold of our culminating conquest. A wave of murmurs, a cocktail of bloodlust and ambition, rippled through the ranks. Zorgan raised a scaly hand, silencing the undercurrent. Earth, he continued, the very syllable thick with contempt, is a fledgling world, a forgotten speck populated by a species scarcely removed from barbarism. Their technology is pitiable, their defenses non-existent. They are no match for the power of the Xylar Imperium. He allowed his words to resonate. Reconnaissance reveals a fractured planet, consumed by internal discord and petty nationalism. They squander their resources on meaningless conflicts and ideological skirmishes. They are ripe for assimilation. He gestured towards a holographic projection of Earth, a vibrant sphere of aquamarine and verdant continents hanging in the black expanse. The strategy is straightforward. We will establish orbital blockades, neutering their capacity for meaningful retaliation, that we will deploy ground forces to secure critical locations, that we will subdue their population and integrate them into the Imperium's fold. A junior officer, fresh from the academy, spoke hesitantly. Admiral, what of their potential? Reports suggest a certain resilience. Zorgan's gaze locked onto the officer, a flicker of inscrutability in his reptilian eyes. Resilience? A euphemism for obstinacy, that a trait readily extinguished with sufficient force. We have faced foes with far greater promise, civilizations wielding technologies that, at this stage, made ours seem primitive. They all crumbled. Earth will prove no different. He turned back to the holographic display. Let there be no doubt as to our purpose. Earth harbors immense reserves of promethium, a resource critical to our war efforts. Its location provides a strategic linchpin in this galactic sector. Its inhabitants, they will serve the Imperium, fueling our expansionist ambitions. As Zorgan concluded his address, the officers dispersed, a renewed sense of purpose, tinged with a hint of trepidation, animating their steps. He remained on the bridge, transfixed by the image of Earth. The subtle disquiet nagged at him. A fleeting moment of doubt quickly suppressed. He had witnessed too much in his long life, too much carnage, too much annihilation. The ceaseless cycle of conquest weighed heavily on his soul, but he knew no alternative. The Imperium demanded it. He demanded it. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Within a pristine laboratory aboard the Dominator, Xylar scientists huddled over consoles, dissecting the latest Earth scans. That Dr. Eris, a cadaverous figure with eyes augmented by optical implants, hammered at a keyboard. Their atmospheric composition is suboptimal, he grumbled. Excessive nitrogen and oxygen, inefficient energy sources, rudimentary communication systems. Their arsenal is equally underwhelming, Dr. Lyra interjected, her voice dripping with derision. Crude projectile weapons, primitive energy systems. They rely on chemical combustion for propulsion. That it's almost charmingly antique. A holographic display showcased the schematic of an Earth fighter jet, its design simplistic and archaic by Xylar standards. Their defensive capabilities are a farce, Lyra continued. A smattering of obsolete missile batteries, antiquated radar technology. They won't even see us coming. Eris zoomed in on a scan of Earth's surface, highlighting areas of dense habitation. Their societal structure is chaotic, myriad nations, conflicting ideologies, rampant poverty and disparity. They are their own undoing. Precisely, Lyra concurred. They are a species poised on the precipice of self-destruction, that we are rendering them a service, imposing order on their disarray. A younger scientist, Dr. Kalin hesitated. But the accounts of their tenacity, their adaptability, shouldn't we proceed with caution? Eris scoffed. Tenacity is merely a measure of a species' breaking point. Adaptability is simply the capacity to ape superior technology. They possess neither to any significant extent. Lyra nodded in agreement. They are a primitive species, ripe for subjugation that we will quell their resistance and assimilate them into the Imperium. It is our ordained future. Simultaneously, within the lavish chambers of Counselor Valerius, political maneuvering was already in full swing. Valerius, a master manipulator with a web of spies and informants stretching across the Imperium, paced restlessly before a shimmering viewport offering a sweeping panorama of the Obsidian Fleet. His aide, a skittish young man named Trax, hovered nearby, clutching a datapad. The scouting vessel reports are confirmed, Counselor. Trax stammered. Earth holds vast Prometheum reserves, far exceeding initial projections. Valerius smirked. Excellent. Just as I anticipated, the Emperor will be most gratified. And the native population? Trax ventured. Are they likely to present a significant obstacle? Valerius waved a dismissive hand. Negligible. A collection of primitives. They may resist initially, but they will soon accept their place. Their spirit is fragile, their resolve weak. He ceased his pacing and turned to face Trax. Earth's true value lies not solely in its resources, but in its strategic significance. It is a portal to this entire sector of the galaxy. Control of Earth will grant us unparalleled authority and leverage. Valerius approached the viewport, his eyes gleaming with avarice. The Emperor may believe he is acting in the Imperium's best interests, but I recognize the truth. This conquest transcends mere resources and territory. It is about power. It is about dominance. And I, Counselor Valerius, intend to seize it. He turned back to Trax, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. Ensure my interests are duly represented in the allocation of Earth's spoils. That I anticipate lavish compensation for my foresight. Trax nodded eagerly, scribbling notes on his datapad. Of course, Counselor. Your interests are my paramount concern. Valerius smiled, a frigid, calculating expression that sent a tremor down Trax's spine. The subjugation of Earth was not simply a military campaign. It was a golden opportunity, a chance for advancement, for influence, for unimaginable wealth. And Counselor Valerius intended to exploit it to its fullest potential. He replayed the Emperor's address before the Imperial Council in his mind. The resources we claim from Earth will empower our war machine. We shall forge advanced, devastating weaponry. We shall fortify our borders and expand our dominion. Valerius knew the Emperor was well-meaning, placing the Imperium's well-being above all else. Yet he remained blind. He was oblivious to the opportunities, unaware of the subtleties of the game. The subjugation of Earth was more than just resources. It was about securing his legacy, the preservation of his name in the books of history. Valerius clasped his hands behind his back and gazed out at the Obsidian Fleet, a smile spreading across his face. The simpletons on Earth had no concept of what was coming. They were so unsuspecting, so backward, so easy to manipulate. He licked his lips in anticipation. The game was about to commence, and Counselor Valerius was ready to play. He turned back to Trax, his eyes glinting with ambition. Prepare the transports, he commanded. I intend to be among the first to set foot on Earth. Much is at stake, and time is of the essence. Trax bowed low. As you command, Counselor. He scurried off to execute his orders, leaving Valerius alone with his thoughts, his dreams of power, and with the unwavering conviction that the Xylar Imperium was destined to reign supreme throughout the galaxy. Echoes of defiance. The Xylar transmission, a guttural declaration of ownership, shattered the familiar hum of Earth like a hammer blow. It seized control of every screen, infiltrated every broadcast, and roared from pocket devices, a chilling overture to oblivion. Initial paralysis gave way to pandemonium. Panic erupted in city squares. Dazed figures wandered disoriented avenues, their faces lit by the ghostly glow of abandoned devices looping the alien ultimatum. Sirens shrieked, a jarring counterpoint to what felt like the world's final ACT. In the Oval Office, President Anya Sharma watched the replay. her features set in a stony mask. The Xylar Admiral, his saurian features a study in reptilian arrogance, seemed to taunt her from the monitor. Nausea threatened, but she wrestled it down. Fear was a privilege denied to her now. "Get me General Williams," she commanded, her voice betraying only a hint of the turmoil within. "And the UN Secretary-General, immediately." The hours dissolved into a frantic montage of calls, briefings, and consultations. The globe, once a fractured mosaic of competing interests, discovered a grim unity in the face of a common, terrifying foe. The Xylar Imperium had inadvertently forged a global alliance where diplomacy had failed, a consensus born of pure, visceral dread. News outlets painted a bleak portrait of a world on the precipice that in Tokyo. Throngs massed before the Imperial Palace, chanting ancient battle hymns in Rio. Spontaneous street parties ignited into passionate displays of national fervor. A bold celebration staring into the void in Moscow. Stoic citizens queued to donate blood, their faces marked with quiet determination. President Sharma understood that these expressions of defiance were valuable, but insufficient. They required a plan, a strategy, more than just fervent hope. She moved to the window, her gaze sweeping over the manicured grounds. A symbol of American might, now a precarious stage for humanity's fate. The sky possessed a deceptively tranquil azure, a stark contrast to the tempest raging within her. Later, President Sharma addressed the planet. Her speech, broadcast from the White House, was a carefully balanced composition of stark reality and unwavering resolve. "My fellow inhabitants of Earth," she began, her voice carrying a quiet authority, "we are confronted by an unprecedented menace, an extraterrestrial force, identifying itself as the Xylar Imperium, has announced its intention to subjugate our world. They perceive us as weak, divided, ripe for conquest." She paused, her eyes locking with millions through the lens. "They are mistaken. They underestimate the resilience of humankind. We are a species forged in the fires of adversity, tempered by millennia of conflict and hardship. We have stared into the abyss before and emerged stronger, more tenacious." She acknowledged the apprehension, the uncertainty that held the world in its grip, but she also spoke of the valor, the ingenuity, and the unyielding spirit that resided within every individual. "This is not a time for despair," she declared. "This is a time for solidarity. This is a time for action that we must stand as one planet, one people, against this mutual adversary." She detailed the measures being implemented to coordinate a unified global defense, the mobilization of armed forces, the revitalization of dormant technologies, the forging of new partnerships. She spoke of the sacrifices that would be necessary, the trials that awaited. "The path ahead will be fraught with peril," she cautioned. "But I have no doubt that we will triumph, that we will not relinquish our world, we will not succumb to tyranny, we will fight for our freedom, for our destiny, for the very continuation of humanity." Her speech concluded with a call to arms, a rallying cry that resonated across the globe. It was a message of hope amidst despair, a beacon of defiance in the encroaching darkness in Cheyenne Mountain, nestled deep within the granite heart of the Colorado Rockies. General Marcus Cole listened to the president's address, his expression unreadable. The vast war room, ordinarily a hive of laser-focused activity, buzzed with palpable tension. Technicians huddled over consoles, their faces illuminated by the eerie green glow of monitors displaying intricate schematics and strategic intelligence. Cole, a man of few words but decisive action, commanded Earth Defense Command, the last bastion against the Xylar onslaught. A soldier to his core, a veteran of countless skirmishes, he had witnessed the worst of humanity, yet still clung to faith in its potential for greatness. The speech concluded. He turned to his officers, his gaze sweeping across their faces. "All right," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble that commanded attention. "Enough talk. Let's get to work." He indicated a large holographic projection in the center of the room, which displayed a three-dimensional map of Earth. Scarlet markers denoted likely invasion zones, based on the projected trajectory of the Xylar fleet. "We require a comprehensive assessment of our defensive capabilities," Cole stated. "I want a complete accounting of our resources, our potential, and our deficiencies." He turned to Colonel Eva Rostova, his chief strategist, a fiercely independent and brilliant woman with an analytical mind. "Colonel, brief me on our orbital assets." Rostova stepped forward, her expression grave. "Sir, our defenses in space are limited. We possess a handful of aging satellite platforms armed with kinetic energy weapons, primarily designed for asteroid interception. They are ill-equipped to engage a fleet of warships." Cole nodded, his face a stony landscape that he was aware of this, but he needed to hear it spoken, to confront the brutal truth of their predicament. "What about Project Icarus?" he inquired, referring to a classified program to develop a laser-based defense network. Rostova hesitated. "The project remains in the prototype stage, sir. We have a single functional satellite in orbit, but its power output is insufficient to inflict significant damage on a capital ship." "Insufficient," Cole echoed, his jaw clenched. "Essentially, then, it's useless." "Not entirely, sir," Rostova countered. "It could target smaller vessels, fighters, or support craft, and it provides valuable sensor data." Cole considered this. "Very well," he conceded. "Deploy Icarus along the primary invasion corridor. Every advantage, however small, may prove decisive." He turned to Commander Kenji Tanaka, his chief technology officer, a brilliant engineer with a gift for improvised solutions. "Commander, what is the status of our terrestrial defenses?" Tanaka adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "Sir, our ground-based missile defense systems are fully operational. We have a layered network of interceptors designed to safeguard key population centers and strategic assets. However, their effectiveness against a coordinated orbital bombardment is uncertain." Cole sighed inwardly. Another massive understatement. They faced an adversary with far superior technology, an enemy capable of unleashing devastation from the heavens at will. "What about our experimental weapons programs?" he asked. "Anything we can deploy rapidly?" Tanaka paused again. "We have several projects in the advanced stages of development, sir. A railgun-based artillery system, a high-powered microwave weapon. But their combat readiness is unproven." "We have no time for trials," Cole said, his voice hardening. "Deploy them. All of them that we need every possible advantage." He knew they were grasping at straws, pitting everything they possessed against overwhelming power, but he refused to yield, he refused to concede. "We may be outgunned," he said, his gaze sweeping over the room. "We may be outmatched, but we are not defeated. We will employ every weapon, every strategy, every ounce of ingenuity to defend our world. We will ensure they pay dearly for every inch of ground they claim. We will demonstrate the true meaning of facing the might of humanity." A wave of affirmation surged through the room, a collective expression of defiance against insurmountable odds, the echoes of the president's address, the echoes of a world united in resistance, reverberated through the halls of Earth Defense Command, a promise to fight a battle they couldn't afford to lose. Earth teetered on the edge, oblivious to the intricate dance of destruction and defiance about to begin at a fractured front. President Sharma surveyed the holographic Earth suspended in the Situation Room, a web of pulsating nodes marking cities bracing for annihilation or feigning readiness. The initial swell of accord after the Xylar Declaration had waned, exposing the fractures beneath the veneer of global unity. The EU's demanding ironclad guarantees of resource access. General Davies, Chief of Staff, announced, his voice strained. "They're threatening withdrawal from the Allied Defense Initiative without it." Sharma massaged her temples, exhaustion etched on her face. "Prioritization based on what metric? Population? Production?" The last attempt at equitable distribution spawned a document longer than the Andes. "Precisely," Davies confirmed bleakly. "And the Chinese delegation proposes a completely independent defense matrix. Invoking national sovereignty and independent command structures, they're erecting their own firewall, essentially. Every nation, it seemed, was constructing its own bulwark, real or imagined. The Xylar Imperium had declared hostilities, but Earth was already consumed by internal strife. "Connect me to Levesque and Zhao. Secure line, simultaneous feed," she commanded. "This impasse has to break, now." The globe dissolved, replaced by the visages of two world leaders, their expressions mirroring the room's tense atmosphere. Levesque, the French president, possessed a world-weary air, Zhao, China's premier, remained enigmatic, his face an unreadable mask. Anya, Levesque began, his tone tight. With respect, my constituents require reassurance that we cannot exhaust our supplies defending potentially lost territories, that we need explicit guarantees. Guarantees impossible to fulfill, Jean-Pierre. Sharma countered, her voice firm yet laced with impatience. We are facing an enemy whose capabilities eclipse our own understanding. We must combine strengths, not hoard them. Zhao spoke, his voice a resonant drone. President Sharma, the People's Republic possesses unique defense protocols. We have made substantial strides in directed energy weaponry. Sharing such innovations entails unacceptable vulnerabilities. Unacceptable vulnerabilities? Sharma echoed, frustration coloring her tone. Premier Zhao, the Xylar Imperium dismisses your sovereign concerns. They covet our world, our resources, our extinction. Division ensures our collective demise. The exchange degenerated into a cacophony of accusations echoing across the digital gulf. Sharma felt a cold dread settling in her gut. This wasn't diplomacy. It was a slow-motion implosion. Meanwhile, in a cramped, dimly lit apartment above the pulsating chaos of Neo-Tokyo, Ben Carter fixated on the cascading lines of code on his screen. He was nearing 2 days without sleep, driven by caffeine and a burning urgency. News of the Xylar Imperium had shaken him, but the subsequent political squabbling had ignited a furious resolve. This is sheer lunacy, he muttered, raking a hand through his already unruly hair. They're squabbling over crumbs while the entire structure collapses. He had tunneled deep into the encrypted servers of the Global Strategic Alliance, a clandestine organization of wealthy elites purportedly orchestrating planetary defense. Instead, he unearthed systemic corruption. He discovered a convoluted nexus of phantom corporations and hidden accounts, all linked to prominent alliance members. They were embezzling funds earmarked for vital research, funneling resources into private shelters and escape routes. Self-serving vultures. Ben spat, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He was poised to breach the final layer of encryption, ready to expose their betrayal to the world. He navigated past a protective barrier, his pulse hammering in his ears that he was in. Spread before him were damning financial records, meeting logs, and encoded communications. He started downloading the trove of data. A warning blazed across his monitor. Breach detected. Initiating lockdown. Damn it. Ben cursed, frantically trying to sever the connection that he reacted too slowly. A digital iron curtain descended, severing his access. He was locked out. That he knew they would hunt him. He had stirred a nest of vipers, now poised to strike. He had to disseminate the evidence, somehow, before they silenced him permanently. Back in the Situation Room, the heated exchange between Sharma, Levesque, and Zhao peaked. Abruptly, a new window materialized on the holographic display, a grainy video feed of Ben Carter's apartment. Madam President, a voice crackled through the comms. We have a code red situation. Possible security breach. A civilian hacker has allegedly obtained sensitive data concerning the Global Strategic Alliance. Sharma's gaze sharpened. What kind of data? Potentially catastrophic, Madam President. Information that could fatally cripple the defense strategy. Before Sharma could respond, Ben Carter's face filled the screen, his expression anxious. My name is Ben Carter, he announced, his eyes darting nervously. I have proof of pervasive corruption within the Global Strategic Alliance. They are diverting assets, stockpiling provisions, and intending to sacrifice the rest of humanity to the Xylar. That I can prove it. He began uploading a compressed file to a public server, the progress bar crawling forward. They're trying to stop me, he declared, his voice gaining intensity. But the truth must be revealed. Humanity has a right to know who is betraying them. The video abruptly terminated, replaced by static. The Situation Room fell silent. Sharma stared at the empty screen, her mind racing. The accusations were incendiary, with the potential to be ruinous if accurate. They would obliterate the fragile coalition and plunge the globe into disarray. Authenticate this, she commanded, her tone ringing with authority. Immediately. I want every agency mobilized, every server, every account, every channel scrutinized. I need confirmation of this man's veracity. General Davies nodded curtly. Yes, Madam President. The atmosphere in the Situation Room underwent a transformation. The squabbling dissolved, supplanted by a palpable focus and strain. The Xylar Imperium remained the external adversary, but humanity now faced a foe within. Hours later, the results arrived. The evidence was undeniable. Ben Carter's allegations were substantiated. The Global Strategic Alliance was a breeding ground for corruption, its members prioritizing personal survival above planetary salvation. But a sickening wave rolled through Sharma. She had anticipated power plays and competing agendas, but had not imagined the scale of the treachery. She immediately authorized the arrest of all implicated members of the alliance, a decision that reverberated through the global political sphere. The revelation spread like a contagion, igniting demonstrations and riots in metropolises around the globe. The precarious alliance fractured, giving way to a fragmented front marred by suspicion and blame. Nations clashed, accusing each other of collusion. The defense strategy stalled. The Xylar Imperium observed, its sensors registering the disarray. The invasion vanguard relentlessly advanced, meeting minimal resistance in his cramped apartment. Ben Carter watched the cascading news reports, his face etched with exhaustion and grim satisfaction. He had unveiled the corruption, but at what cost? Had he salvaged humanity or hastened its demise? One thing remained certain. The battle had merely begun. He was uncertain how he would contribute, but felt compelled to do so, compelled by duty to those risking everything for humanity's future. The Xylar Imperium might have declared war on Earth, but humanity had declared war on itself, and Ben Carter was caught in the vortex, an unwilling combatant in a struggle for the very soul of the planet. First blood. A carmine sun bled across the jagged remains of Chicago's skyline as the initial Xylar descent craft pierced the upper atmosphere. These were not heralded by trumpets of victory, but by the chillingly precise descent, like metallic arachnids lowering on gossamer threads. The dull gray, angular vessels disgorged their payload. Xylar infantry squads clad in iridescent, insect-like carapaces, unlike the sleek obsidian destroyers that had darkened the skies days prior. These were the ground pounders. The Vanguard, the blunt force instrument designed to extinguish any lingering sparks of defiance. Their energy weapons buzzed with pent-up fury, primed to vaporize any movement. Arrogance radiated from their forms as their multifaceted eyes surveyed the wreckage. Earth was supposed to be subdued, its spirit broken. Orbital bombardment, a clinical exercise. Resistance, a negligible factor. They were mistaken. The lead squad, commanded by a Xylar Centurion named Krell, advanced down the skeletal remains of Michigan Avenue. The air reeked of ozone and charred concrete, a fine grit clinging to their armor. Krell indicated with a hooked appendage. Scour the structures, locate any residual human presence. Obliterate it. His team, a dozen strong, dispersed. Movement was fluid and practiced, weapons at the ready point. One of the lesser ranks, barely mature by Xylar standards, nudged a chunk of fallen masonry. Beneath it lay a tattered teddy bear that a ripple of revulsion flickered across the creature's features. Worthless sentimentality. Then, chaos erupted, not with a singular cataclysm, but with a tempest of concentrated ferocity. From gaping wounds in a skyscraper's facade, a deluge of projectiles tore into the Xylar formation. Energy shields flared, wavered, then shattered under the relentless assault. Piercing shrieks, high-pitched and chitinous, were abruptly silenced as bullets found vulnerable points in their exoskeletons. Krell bellowed, a primal challenge that reverberated through the ruined thoroughfare. His personal energy shield shimmered into existence, a protective dome deflecting the lethal rain. Suppression fire. His voice, a guttural rasp filtered through his helmet's modulator, barked the command. The surviving Xylar sought refuge behind overturned vehicles and mounds of pulverized debris. Returning fire, their energy rifles unleashed bolts of incandescent plasma, vaporizing chunks of masonry and showering sparks onto the ravaged street. The human combatants, however, were phantoms, flitting between vantage points and vanishing into the labyrinthine ruins. The ambush was orchestrated by Sergeant Eva Rostova, a veteran sculpted by the crucible of war. Her face was a roadmap of hardship and resolve. Eyes, the color of a glacial crevasse, held a laser focus, scanning the battlefield with predatory keenness. She wore patched and mended military fatigues, scavenged from a bygone era, and wielded a battle-scarred assault rifle that had witnessed too many sunsets. "Maintain pressure," she roared, her voice cutting through the din. "Don't grant them purchase." Rostova was a wraith moving through the devastation, a danse macabre with death as her partner. These streets were etched into her memory. Every alleyway a familiar scar, every hidden doorway a childhood haunt, every sniper's nest a memory. She had grown up here, played here, dreamt here. Now, she fought to reclaim it, to avenge the countless souls lost in the initial onslaught. She triggered a short burst, felling a Xyler who had imprudently exposed himself. The alien collapsed, its carapace breached, smoke curling from the wound. Without pause, Rostova relocated, anticipating the enemy's response. This was no clash of armies on an open field. This was a brutal insurgency, a desperate fight for survival against a foe wielding vastly superior technology. The humans were outgunned, overmatched, but unbowed. They exploited their intimate knowledge of the terrain, their resourcefulness, and their unyielding resolve to inflict maximum damage. Krell seethed. He had anticipated a mopping up exercise, a mere formality of subjugation. Instead, he was mired in a sanguinary trap, his squad decimated by a cadre of human rebels. Raising his energy rifle, he unleashed a torrent of plasma fire at the building from which the assault had originated. The facade crumbled, showering the area with dust and debris. "We shall obliterate them," he bellowed, voice thick with fury. "We will grind them to dust." Even as the words escaped his mandibles, another volley of projectiles tore through the air, claiming 2 more of his troops. The chilling realization dawned on Krell. He was ensnared, surrounded by an unseen adversary that refused to break. He activated his comms, requesting reinforcements. "We are sustaining heavy casualties." The reply was immediate, impersonal, and dismissive. "Reinforcements unavailable. Secure your position and neutralize resistance." A guttural string of Xyler curses poured forth from Krell's throat that he was isolated. Meanwhile, aboard the Xyler flagship, a metallic leviathan orbiting the ruined Earth, Jax observed the unfolding engagement with mounting vexation at a high-ranking officer within the Xyler Imperium, a veteran of countless invasions, a conqueror of worlds beyond measure. He had envisioned Earth as another swift victory, a mere footnote in his ascent to galactic dominance. Instead, the humans displayed an unexpected tenacity. Their initial opposition had been feeble, uncoordinated, easily suppressed. Now, however, they retaliated with a ferocity bordering on mania. Guerrilla warfare, ambushes, and hit-and-fade tactics were inflicting considerable losses on the Xyler ground forces. Jax stalked the bridge of the flagship, his clawed hands flexing and unflexing that he struggled to comprehend it. The humans were technologically inferior, their military fractured, their infrastructure obliterated. They ought to have capitulated, accepted their role as a conquered populace. "Report," he snapped, his voice a harsh command at a Xyler officer. Exoskeleton gleaming beneath the unforgiving illumination of the bridge, turned to face him. "Ground forces are encountering unforeseen resistance, Lord Jax. Human insurgents are employing guerrilla tactics, resulting in casualties." Jax hissed. "Casualties? Quantify." Preliminary assessments indicate losses of approximately 20% of the initial deployment. Jax slammed his fist against the command console, the metal groaning under the impact. 20% on a world designated for pacification. The officer recoiled. "The humans display greater ingenuity than initially projected, Lord Jax. They exploit the ruins of their urban centers, ambushing our forces from concealed locations." Jax turned towards a holographic display providing live battlefield footage. He watched as a Xyler squad was caught in a crossfire within a demolished alleyway, their energy shields failing against a barrage of projectiles. He observed the humans, faces etched with grim determination, fighting with a desperate valor that bordered on the suicidal, but a fleeting sense of something akin to respect flickered within him, quickly suppressed. Respect was a vulnerability, an emotion forbidden within the Xyler Imperium. The humans were an impediment, an irritation to be purged. "Escalate the orbital bombardment," he commanded, his voice devoid of warmth. Reduce the settlements to ash. Leave nothing but cinders. The officer hesitated. However, Lord Jax, the urban centers are already heavily degraded. Further bombardment will only. I am unconcerned, Jax roared. I demand the annihilation of human resistance, that I demand they comprehend the futility of defiance, that I demand they internalize the consequence of opposing the Xylar Imperium. The officer inclined his head, face paling. As you command, Lord Jax. Back on the ground, Rostova and her squad continued their relentless offensive. They transitioned from structure to structure, ambushing Xylar squads, emplacing explosives, and generally sowing mayhem. They were a barb in the side of the Xylar invaders, a constant rejoinder that Earth remained unsubdued. Rostova paused, drawing breath behind a collection of collapsed masonry. Her face was streaked with grime and perspiration, her garments torn, and her physique screamed in protest. Yet, her eyes still burned with unwavering purpose. Situation report? She asked, turning to one of her team, a young man named Marco. Marco shrugged. We're holding, Sergeant. However, they're increasing troop deployments, and orbital strikes intensify. Rostova acknowledged. She could feel the earth trembling beneath her boots as the Xylar warships unleashed their aerial fury. The skies erupted with concussive blasts and the agonized cries of the dying. We must persist, she stated, her voice unwavering. We cannot allow them to break us. We must demonstrate that we will not capitulate, that we will not yield. Marco regarded her, his eyes reflecting admiration. You genuinely believe we can prevail, Sergeant? Rostova smiled, a steely, resolved smile. I cannot guarantee victory, Marco, but I know we can exact a price. We can make them bleed for every fragment of territory they seize. And perhaps, just perhaps, that will suffice. She raised her assault weapon, aiming towards the enemy. Let us deliver them more hell. With that, she guided her team back into the fray, prepared to fight to the death for the world she cherished. The first blood had spilled, and the war for Earth had truly commenced. The cost of annexation was beginning to be tallied, and the Xylar Imperium would discover the total far exceeded their projections. Guerrilla warfare. Charred skeletons of skyscrapers pierced the sooty sky above what was once Chicago. From a precarious ledge on a fractured office tower, Sergeant Eva Rostova, grime etching lines on her sweat-slicked face, observed a Xylar infantry squad marching below. Their sleek, obsidian armor glinted with false promise under the fading sunlight, a testament to an empire drunk on its own might. They hadn't reckoned with Eva's particular brand of defiance. Everyone locked and loaded? She rasped into her comm. A chorus of confirmations buzzed back. Her team, a patchwork force of ex-military, reformed gang members, and ordinary citizens forged into warriors, represented Earth's gritty retort to Xylar technology. Raw courage, intimate knowledge of the ravaged terrain, and the weapon of surprise. The Xylar were creatures of habit, adhering to rigid formations, reliant on their armor plating and energy projectors. They hadn't assimilated the brutal lessons of urban combat, hadn't learned that a toppled pile of concrete could be as lethal as a plasma discharge. Engage. Eva breathed. The world erupted. Crude Molotov cocktails, born from scavenged gasoline and pilfered bottles, descended upon the unsuspecting invaders, transmuting their flawless armor into writhing pyres. Simultaneously, concealed marksmen on nearby rooftops unleashed a torrent of high-caliber rounds, seeking out the chinks in the Xylar's metallic hides where machine interfaced with alien flesh. That a chorus of distorted, electronic shrieks tore through the air as the Xylar scrambled for purchase, for sanctuary that did not exist. Eva's team flowed through the shattered cityscape with practiced grace, dissolving into the ruined labyrinth before the enemy could even acquire targets. This was guerrilla warfare, Earth's desperate ballet of survival. Victory in a direct clash remained a distant dream, but they could bleed the Xylar, one ambush at a time, one calculated strike after another. They would transform Earth into a festering nightmare for them, a landscape where every shadow concealed a viper, every ruined corner whispered of demise. Far away, deep within a fortified bunker nestled beneath the ancient Appalachian Mountains, Ben Carter, back illuminated by a screen's glow, wrestled with a resurrected bank of computers. The bunker pulsed with the thrumming rhythm of generators and the frenetic energy of a dozen coders, each fighting tirelessly to unravel the Xyler's digital stranglehold. Ben, once a whistleblower who'd exposed corruption within the global strategic alliance, was now a linchpin of Earth's resistance. His mastery of computer systems was legendary, his ability to dissect and manipulate complex code bordering on precognitive. Jackpot, he muttered, eyes locked on the cascading lines of code. I've cracked their eastern seaboard comms net. A wave of jubilation swept through the bunker. It was a pivotal triumph. The Xyler leaned heavily on their internal comms architecture to direct troop deployments, disseminate intel, and maintain operational control. A rupture in that network meant sowing discord and uncertainty, making them even more susceptible to the shadow warfare playing out across the globe. Downloading tactical schematics now, Ben announced, his voice tight with focus. Armor weaknesses, patrol patterns, supply routes, this is pure gold. The information he was extracting would prove invaluable to the resistance cells in the field. They would possess the knowledge to choose their battles, prioritize targets, and exploit the hairline fractures in the Xyler's seemingly impregnable defenses. Ben, a voice called from across the room. We're intercepting a high-priority transmission from their flagship, heavily encrypted, but the signature screams, important. Ben spun in his chair, a furrow appearing on his brow. Patch it through. He rapidly scanned the encrypted data stream, his thoughts a whirlwind of calculation. The Xyler's security protocols were formidable, yet Ben possessed an uncanny aptitude for deciphering them. It was akin to unlocking an intricate puzzle box, a challenge he embraced. After what seemed an eternity, the encryption buckled and folded. The transmission hissed to life, a garbled voice spitting out the harsh, guttural cadences of the Xyler tongue. Casualties escalating, resistance, unexpected, requesting reinforcements. Ben listened with unwavering concentration, his fingers dancing across the keyboard, recording every syllable. The Xyler were faltering. Their invasion was rapidly devolving from a strategic conquest into a desperate struggle. He looked up, a mirthless smile curving his lips. They're bleeding. Aboard the Obsidian Hammer, the Xyler invasion fleet's command vessel, Admiral Zorgan stood on the bridge, his three eyes narrowed in simmering rage. The holographic display before him projected a map of Earth, speckled with red icons representing Xyler detachments. Too many of those icons flickered ominously, designating units under siege or eliminated. Report, he bellowed, his voice resonating through the bridge. A junior officer, his antennae trembling with apprehension, stammered forward. Lord Admiral, casualties continue to climb. The resistance is proving far more tenacious than initial projections indicated. Sector Gamma 7 is experiencing severe insurgent incursions, requesting supplemental ground forces. Zorgan slammed his fist against the command console, the metal groaning beneath the impact. Inadequate. I was assured of seamless compliance, complete integration within a standard cycle. Instead, we are mired in a planetary bog, contending with primitives. He strode back and forth across the bridge, his heavy treads reverberating on the deck plating. The assault on Earth was supposed to be a brisk exercise in dominance, a showcase of Xyler's supremacy. Instead, the humans were displaying a resilience that defied all expectations. Their unconventional tactics were proving remarkably efficient, their resolve unyielding. Increase orbital bombardment, he commanded, his voice frigid. Purge Sector Gamma 7. Let them comprehend the tariff of defiance. The officer hesitated, antennae twitching. Lord Admiral, orbital bombardment will yield substantial collateral damage. Civilian losses will be considerable. Zorgan turned a searing gaze on him. Collateral damage is inconsequential. The singular imperative is the eradication of this rebellion. Is my meaning unambiguous? The officer lowered his head. Perfectly unambiguous, Lord Admiral. As the officer turned to execute his orders, Zorgan felt a twinge of something alien to him. Doubt. The perpetual cycle of conquest had always been sanctified by the promise of expanding the empire, imposing structure upon unruly worlds. Yet the obliteration he was about to unleash upon Earth felt different, felt wrong. That he ruthlessly suppressed the sensation. Such ruminations were perilous, verging on treasonous, he was a vessel of the Xylar Imperium, and his duty was to obey, to conquer, to crush. All dissent. Yet even as he watched the obsidian hammer rain down its obliterating ordnance upon Earth, he couldn't quell the sensation that something was fundamentally askew, that the Xylar Imperium, in its ravenous pursuit of dominion, had become untethered from its moral compass. Back in Chicago, Eva Rostova watched the heavens ignite with the infernal bloom of orbital bombardment. The ground convulsed beneath her feet, and the atmosphere filled with the pungent stench of burning steel and carbonized flesh. "They're dialing it up," she stated with grim resolve to her team. "They aim to break us." But deep down, she knew they wouldn't. They couldn't afford to. They were battling for their homeland, for those they held dear, for their very existence. The Xylar might command superior technology, but humanity possessed something far more potent. The unyielding drive to resist, the courage to stand firm, the unshakable conviction that even against insurmountable odds, triumph was attainable. Eva raised her rifle, her eyes burning with defiance. Let's remind them what being an Earthling truly signifies. The Xylar believed they understood the nature of warfare. They understood the application of overwhelming force, the dispassionate logic of destruction, and the crushing weight of imperial authority. But they failed to comprehend the tenacity of a cornered creature, the savage fury of a species defending its claim to existence. They were clueless about guerrilla warfare entirely. They were about to receive a truly brutal crash course. The jungles of the Amazon transformed into intricate mazes of improvised booby traps and deadly ambushes. The soaring heights of the Himalayas echoed with the sharp reports of sniper fire. The ruins of once great cities became killing grounds, where Xylar soldiers ventured into the shadows, never to emerge. Everywhere the Xylar ventured, they encountered resistance. Every step they took was met with defiance. The earth bled, yet it also retaliated in kind. And with each Xylar soldier felled, with each piece of critical data Ben Carter unearthed, the glimmer of potential victory burned a little brighter. The cost was staggering, the sacrifices heartbreaking. Yet the humans refused to yield. They would fight until their final breath, until the last round was spent, until their blood stained the soil. They would make the Xylar atone for every square inch of earth they despoiled. Because this was not simply a conflict over territory. It was a struggle for survival. It was a fight for autonomy. It was a war for the very essence of humanity. And they had no intention of losing. The hammer falls. Admiral Zorgan glared at the holographic earth, its vibrant hues defiled by angry crimson rashes flickering across continents. The incoming reports sparked a furious boil in his gut. Resistance flared stubbornly, like infected wounds resisting cauterization. Chicago, despite the withering orbital fire, was an unyielding splinter, while fragmentary, intercepted communications hinted at coordinated defiance across multiple theaters. His fist slammed down on the command console, a metallic shriek, echoing under the impact. "Enough," he bellowed, the sound reverberating through the Dominator-S bridge. "Do these insects dare defy us? They cling to their miserable existences as though they possessed intrinsic worth." His second, Commander Thrax, a massive Xylar whose mandibles bore witness to countless battles, fidgeted. "Admiral, initial estimates indicate substantial civilian losses accompany each bombardment, sustained strikes of this magnitude." Zorgan dismissed him with a flick of his wrist. "Civilian casualties are regrettable, but ultimately inconsequential. Fear is a lever. Thrax, a lever we haven't yet fully engaged. Let them behold the might of the Xylar, and grasp the exercise in futility that is their struggle." He returned his gaze to the projection, reptilian eyes glinting with frigid intent. "Order a comprehensive saturation bombardment. Focus on key population nodes. Let them taste the consequences of challenging the Imperium." Thrax hesitated. "Admiral, are you certain? The Council." "The Council luxuriates in their distant, gilded cages," Zorgan spat. "They remain blissfully ignorant of the exigencies on the ground. They will evaluate results, not methods. Grind these humans to dust, Thrax. Utterly obliterate them, and the Council will sing paeans to my name." He stabbed a clawed digit at the Earth image. New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow, Beijing, Rio de Janeiro, excise them. Leave only ash and ruin. Let the survivors crawl from the wreckage and plead for reprieve. That is the only idiom these primitives comprehend. Thrax, disquiet still etched on his features, finally lowered his head. As you decree, Admiral. He turned to issue the command, his voice taut with barely contained trepidation. The Dominator trembled as its ordnance systems primed at a low thrum pulse through the deck, a prelude to the coming apocalypse. Zorgan watched, his face a stony mask of gratification, but he envisioned the pandemonium, the screams, the unadulterated terror gripping the human metropolises to symphony of annihilation. And he the maestro. On Earth, within the hastily erected subterranean bunker beneath what remained of Washington, D.C., President Anya Sharma toiled relentlessly. The war room buzzed with activity, lit by the glow from screens displaying disjointed reports from the ravaged globe. Communication lines crackled with static, choked with desperate pleas. She had aged a decade in mere months, the planet's dire straits weighing upon her. Yet, despite the weariness etched on her face, a fierce fire burned within her gaze. "Any news from General Petrov?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Still nothing, Madam President," replied her chief of staff, Marcus Cole, his countenance grim. "His last transmission arrived over an hour ago. They were engaging Xylar ground forces near the Volga." Anya expelled a breath. The Eastern Front was collapsing. Despite tenacious defense, the Xylar's raw power held sway. Reports from Chicago mirrored the grim assessment. Eva Rostova's guerrilla bands inflicted losses, but they were losing ground against the orbital assault. A piercing alarm shattered the tense quiet. Overriding the room's constant dim lights flickered, eliciting a collective gasp. "What is it?" Anya demanded, her pulse quickening. A junior technician hammered at his console, fingers blurring across the keys. "Madam President, we're detecting numerous energy signatures, orbital weaponry. Charging, targeting major population centers." Ice flooded Anya's veins. She understood the grim implication. The Xylar were ratcheting up the violence, jettisoning even the faintest semblance of restraint. "Which cities?" she managed, the question barely audible. The technician looked ashen. "New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow, Beijing, Rio de Janeiro." The list continues. "Madam President, they're targeting every significant population hub on the planet." The room seemed to pitch and yaw at a wave of nausea threatened to overwhelm Anya. Millions of lives, poised on the precipice of obliteration. The sheer scale defied imagination. "Activate the emergency broadcast system," she commanded, her voice regaining its timbre. "I must address the world." Moments later, her likeness appeared on screens across the globe, in bunkers, shelters, within the few homes clinging to power. Grief shadowed her features, yet a steely will resonated in her eyes. "My fellow inhabitants of Earth," she began, her voice clear and unwavering. "I speak to you at an hour of unprecedented catastrophe. The Xylar Imperium, in their pitiless pursuit of dominance, have committed an act of unparalleled savagery. They are raining down fire upon our cities. They are butchering our people. They seek to fracture our spirit." Her voice trembled slightly, but she quickly steadied herself. "They imagine that by razing our homes, they can erode our resolve. They believe that by inflicting unspeakable torment, they can coerce us into subservience. They are mistaken." She paused, inhaling deeply. "We will not capitulate, we will not yield, that we will not break, that we will confront them in our streets, on our fields, within our skies, that we will fight until the last Xylar warship burns in the vacuum. We will fight until our world breathes free." As she finished, the first detonations pulverized the targeted cities. Over New York, the sky flared white as beams of concentrated energy converged. The famed skyline dissolved into a cataclysmic conflagration. Structures, once symbols of human achievement, crumbled to dust, their foundations vaporized. A deafening roar ripped through the air, followed by a shockwave that scoured the city, leaving behind only ruin. In London, the Houses of Parliament, Buckingham Palace, the Tower of London, became embers amid the wreckage. The Thames roared into steam. Screams were lost within the all-consuming blaze. In Tokyo, the vibrant metropolis was now a scorched husk. The Imperial Palace, a repository of history and culture, disappeared, The once bustling streets were rivers of ash and incinerated remains. Identical scenes of devastation unfolded in Moscow, Beijing, Rio de Janeiro, and countless other cities. The Xyler's iron fist had descended, staggering the world. Within the subterranean bunker, Anya observed the unfolding tragedy on the monitors, tears streaming down her cheeks. She saw satellite views of infernos, heat signatures illustrating the magnitude of human loss. A glacial rage took root within her, a burning desire for reprisal that consumed her being. The Xyler had crossed an insurmountable line. They had unleashed a level of destruction so immense, it defied thought. They had revealed their true barbarity. Her knuckles burned white as she clenched her fists. "They will suffer," she breathed, her words laced with venom. "They will suffer for every life extinguished. They will suffer for every city eradicated. They will suffer for this." She pivoted toward Marcus Cole, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. "I want every resource funneled into the creation of weapons capable of reaching the Xyler, and I want every scientist, every engineer, every soldier dedicated to one purpose: the destruction of the Xyler Imperium." Cole nodded, his expression grim. "It will be done, Madam President." Anya turned back to the screens, watching the blazing cities. The world stood transformed. The Xyler unleashed a fiery tempest, but they had also ignited a flame of resistance, an inextinguishable inferno. The hammer had fallen, yet Earth would not break. That it would rise from the ashes, fueled by vengeance, exacting a cost of conquest past measure. Beneath the rubble, the air hung thick with the aftertaste of destruction, a metallic tang mingling with the bitter scent of pulverized stone. A violet sky, bruised by the lingering exhalations of Zorgon's assault, cast a somber light on the ruins of Chicago. Amidst the wreckage, life, tenacious and unyielding, began to resurge. From a jumbled heap of shattered concrete, a grimy hand, stained crimson, emerged, followed by another. Then, a woman, choked with soot and struggling for breath in the poisoned atmosphere, hauled herself upright. Maya, once an engineer, her tattered overalls a testament to her former life, surveyed the landscape of devastation. The skeletal remains of the Sears Tower, a broken monument against the skyline, served as a stark reminder of what had been lost. Yet, in her bloodshot eyes, a defiant ember glowed. She would endure. "Anyone alive?" she rasped. Her voice a dry croak. A faint moan answered her call. Maya clambered desperately over the unstable debris, wrenching away hunks of pulverized material to reveal a young man trapped beneath a fallen girder. His leg was grotesquely angled, a clear fracture, yet consciousness flickered in his eyes. "Easy now," Maya soothed, her tone gentling. "I'm going to get you loose." Driven by adrenaline and a fierce instinct, she worked with feverish intensity, ignoring the protests of her own battered body. Using a length of twisted rebar as a makeshift lever, it took nearly an hour, but finally, the imprisoning steel yielded. "Thanks," the young man breathed, his face a mask of agony. "Ben." "Maya," she responded, assisting him to stand, his weight heavy on her shoulder. "We need shelter, now." They faltered through the shattered avenues, joining a trickle of other survivors surfacing from the depths. A ragtag collection. Executives in shredded suits, laborers still adorned with protective headgear, families clinging to meager salvaged possessions, their faces, etched with trauma and mourning, masked an underlying resolve. They had lost their world, but not their spirit. Far below the shattered cityscape, within a labyrinth of interconnected bunkers and repurposed subway lines, the seeds of rebellion were germinating, not in government-built havens of comfort, but in improvised shelters, fueled by fear and a sliver of hope. Within one such refuge, carved from an abandoned station, a sputtering generator cast eerie, animated shadows across the clammy walls. Around a makeshift table cobbled together from salvaged plywood, a somber assembly huddled, scrutinizing a tattered map of the devastated metropolis. The Xyler patrols are surface-bound. A veteran named Marcus, his face, weathered and grim, pointed out, tracing a route through the ruins. Their focus is suppression, flushing out anyone left. "They won't find us," a young woman, Sarah, retorted, her eyes flashing with defiance. "We know these tunnels better than they ever will." Knowledge alone is insufficient, Marcus countered, his voice steely. We must strike at their vulnerabilities, disrupt their supply chains, sabotage their facilities, make them regret their invasion. Debate erupted, voices competing in the confined space. Strategies diverged. Some favored hit-and-run tactics, ambushing patrols and disrupting logistics. Others urged a more decisive strike, targeting key Xylar infrastructure. We need something greater, Sarah pressed, her voice amplified with urgency. Something to truly disorient them. Her words echoed in the air, a silent yearning for a miracle. Overwhelmed, outgunned, they faced a seemingly invincible foe. Yet, the flame of resistance flickered. They were embers, awaiting the catalyst to reignite. Far removed from the ravaged city, deep within a clandestine laboratory hewn from a forgotten Cold War installation, Dr. Eris Thorne battled his own demons. His space was a chaotic symphony of wires, circuit boards, and nascent prototypes. Monitors pulsed with cryptic equations and diagrams, illuminating his gaunt features. Eris, a brilliant yet socially withdrawn scientist, found solace in the company of machines, preferring the clean precision of algorithms over the unpredictable nature of human interactions. Even he, however, could not remain aloof in the face of the Xylar onslaught. The images of the bombardment, a brutal spectacle, had burned themselves into his consciousness. He paced restlessly, running a hand through his unkempt hair. For weeks, he had toiled with frenetic energy, driven by caffeine and a burning desire to retaliate against the invaders. He had dissected captured Xylar technology, scrutinizing their weaponry, probing their vulnerabilities. He had discovered something, a weak point, a flaw in their seemingly impenetrable defenses. The Council would deem it insane, unethical, perilous. Eris was unconcerned. The Council wasn't huddled in the dark, hearing the screams of the dying. The Council wasn't witnessing their world consumed by flames. He ceased pacing, pivoting to face a large display showcasing a complex schematic. IT was a daring concept, so unconventional it verged on the fantastical. But it was also their only recourse. He paused, his brow furrowed in concentration. He grasped the inherent dangers. The potential ramifications were dire, but he couldn't stand passively by while humanity was extinguished. He had to act. The time has come, he murmured, his voice almost inaudible, to combat fire with its own essence. His fingers danced across the keyboard, launching a cascade of code across the screen, a series of intricate commands that would initiate his plan. He was walking a tightrope, toying with forces beyond complete comprehension. But he was also a scientist, a resolver of problems, determined to find a solution, regardless of the sacrifice. He needed resources, supplies, trustworthy collaborators, those willing to risk everything. That he glanced at the screen, at his improbable design. That he knew the journey would be arduous, he knew sacrifices would be necessary. But he also understood that the survival of humanity hinged on it. He enabled a secure channel. His fingers trembling slightly, he had sequestered himself from the outside world for weeks, consumed by his work. Now, he needed to connect. He needed to find allies. The face materialized on the screen, a woman with weary eyes and a determined jawline. President Anya Sharma. Dr. Thorne, she greeted, her voice strained but resolute. I believed we had lost you. I've been occupied, Eris responded, his voice tentative. I have something that could be of assistance. He hesitated, struggling to articulate his plan. It was so extreme, so unprecedented, that he feared she would write him off as delusional. What is it, Doctor? Anya pressed, her voice tinged with impatience. We are operating without the luxury of games. Eris took a deep breath and proceeded. He spoke rapidly, his words tumbling over each other, his zeal eclipsing his customary awkwardness. He presented his plan, the underlying science, the associated risks. Anya listened in silence, her expression unreadable. Upon his conclusion, she paused, her gaze unwavering. Are you certain this will succeed, Doctor? She finally inquired, her voice barely audible. No, Eris conceded. But it is our most promising option. Anya sighed, her shoulders slumping. She appeared older, more burdened than Eris had ever witnessed. The world's weight rested on her shoulders, borne with quiet dignity. Very well, Doctor, she declared, her voice regaining its strength. I am committed. Inform me of your requirements. Eris felt a wave of relief, a glimmer of hope in the pervasive darkness. He wasn't alone. Others were willing to fight, to stake everything for the survival of humanity. I need resources, he requested. Supplies, personnel, and absolute secrecy. This cannot be divulged to anyone, not even the Council. It will be provided, Anya assured. Consider it accomplished. The connection severed, leaving Eris alone once more in his laboratory. He regarded the blueprints on the screen, the seemingly impossible plan he had conceived. He knew the odds were stacked against them, that he knew the dangers were immense. But he also knew they were compelled to try. They were compelled to resist. They were compelled to do everything in their power to prevent humanity's demise. That he resumed his work, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The fate of the world rested on his shoulders. And he wouldn't falter. Beneath the rubble, in the inky depths, a spark of hope had ignited. And that spark, he knew, was destined to become a roaring inferno. A desperate gambit. The overhead lights in the makeshift war room glared off Dr. Thorne's spectacles as he addressed the assembled coalition leaders. The discordant symphony of faces, each representing a fractured nation, stared back, their features scored with the deep ravines of exhaustion from weeks of relentless Xylar attacks. That a laser pointer trembled in his hand, painting a restless crimson across the holographic projection of an alien warship. As you're all aware, Thorne began, his voice thin and unused to command. Conventional tactics are futile. Their technological advantage is staggering. We simply cannot win a head-to-head confrontation. General Petrov, a battle-scarred veteran whose flesh hand had been replaced by gleaming cybernetics, scoffed. A fact we're intimately familiar with. Doctor, we're surrendering territory faster than refugees can flee. Get to the crux of it. Thorne's Adam's apple danced as he swallowed. The crux is, we must adopt asymmetrical warfare, that we must exploit their vulnerabilities. With a tap, he highlighted a seemingly insignificant area on the warship's carapace. This section houses the environmental control system. IT maintains a Terran standard atmosphere within the vessel. And your point, Doctor? President Sharma inquired, her voice heavy with fatigue. The weight of global leadership seemed to physically bend her forward. Their physiology, while requiring oxygen, isn't adapted to our planet's teeming biosphere, Thorne elaborated, his voice gaining strength as he entered the realm of scientific discourse. The Xylar homeworld is aseptic, excessively controlled. They haven't encountered the sheer, chaotic diversity of Earth, the constant onslaught of viruses, bacteria, and fungi our systems have evolved to parry. A ripple of hushed murmurs spread through the room, a blend of confusion and cautious skepticism. You're suggesting germ warfare, Doctor? Petrov sneered. Not precisely. Thorne corrected, adjusting his glasses nervously. I propose weaponizing our biosphere, crafting a bespoke biological agent, targeted specifically at their unique physiology, against which they possess no inherent defenses. Silence descended, thick as interstellar dust. Then, a chorus of objections erupted. That's sheer madness, a representative from the European Union exclaimed, his voice laced with incredulity. Are we to sink to their level? Embrace biological weapons? What about the risk of mutation? The potential to harm our own population? A scientist from the CDC interjected, her face etched with concern. Too dangerous, too unpredictable, President Sharma concluded, doubt clouding her features. We cannot unleash something we cannot contain. Thorne held his ground, his gaze unwavering behind the lenses. We are already losing. Each sunrise witnesses the fall of another city, the extinguishing of countless lives. Conventional methods have failed. This crisis demands a radical solution. This is our only recourse, our sole means of retaliation. He paused, allowing his words to resonate. Moreover, we wouldn't be unleashing a wildfire, we'd be surgically targeting a specific chink in their armor, a fragility unique to the Xylar. It's elegant in its precision. President Sharma sighed, massaging her temples wearily. Elegant, Doctor, we're discussing biological warfare. There's nothing remotely elegant about it. Necessity, Thorne whispered, his voice barely audible. Sometimes, necessity demands unpalatable choices. The debate raged for what felt like an eternity, a maelstrom of voices arguing the merits and perils of Thorne's proposal. President Sharma listened intently, weighing the potential ramifications. The faces surrounding her mirrored the profound moral quandary. Had they strived so earnestly to safeguard human values in the face of the Xylar's barbarity, only to be forced to forsake them in the name of survival? Finally, Sharma raised a hand, silencing the cacophony. Enough, she stated, her tone firm. I require time for deliberation. She turned to Thorne. Doctor, I demand to see the data, every detail. Convince me that this weapon is as discriminating as you assert. Assure me that the risks are manageable. Demonstrate that this is truly the only path. Thorne nodded, a wave of relief washing over him. Of course, Madam President, I shall prepare everything immediately. As the meeting dissolved, Alara Vance, a young biologist who had observed the proceedings in quiet intensity, approached Thorne. She was a slender woman with piercing, astute eyes and a nervous tick of twisting a strand of her dark hair. Dr. Thorne, she began, her voice soft yet distinct. I believe I can assist. Thorne regarded her with surprise. Assist? How so? I've been analyzing the Xylar tissue samples recovered from the down scout ship, Alara explained. I've identified a unique protein sequence within their immune system. Unlike anything found on Earth, that IT may hold the key to specific targeting. Thorne's eyes widened behind his thick glasses. You've identified the target? Alara nodded. I believe so that I possess preliminary data, but I require additional resources, more advanced equipment, to validate my findings. Resources? Equipment. You will have everything you require, Thorne responded, his voice brimming with renewed hope. This fundamentally alters the equation. President Sharma sat in solitude within her office, her gaze fixed on the ravaged cityscape beyond the window. The skeletal remains of skyscrapers clawed at the smoke-choked sky, stark reminders of the Xylar's destructive capabilities. The crushing burden of her responsibility threatened to buckle her under its weight. She scrutinized the data Thorne had provided, a dense compendium of scientific reports, genetic analyses, and theoretical models that IT was overwhelming, intricate, and deeply unsettling. She grasped the science, but wrestled with the ethical ramifications. The Xylar had displayed no compassion. They had slaughtered millions, razed entire cities, and subjugated countless others. They had trampled upon every tenet of human decency. Did they now deserve mercy? Could humanity afford the luxury of adhering to moral principles when its very existence was at stake? She lifted a small framed photograph from her desk that IT depicted her daughter, Sarah, her radiant smile brimming with life. Sarah had perished in the initial Xylar assault on London. The searing pain of her loss was an ever-present ache in Sharma's heart. She closed her eyes, the image of Sarah's joyful face seared into her mind. Could she, as a mother, as a leader, condemn countless others to a similar fate by rejecting this perilous gamble? She opened her eyes, her gaze hardening with resolve. She would not allow Sarah's death to be in vain. She would fight for the future, even if it necessitated agonizing choices. Later that night, Alara Vance stood hunched over a complex configuration of laboratory equipment within a clandestine underground facility. The air vibrated with the low hum of generators, the only sound besides the rhythmic tapping of keyboards. She meticulously analyzed the protein sequence she had isolated, executing simulations and cross-referencing her data against every known terrestrial organism. Hours dissolved into a seamless stream of data points and calculations. Alara was absorbed in her work, oblivious to the passage of time, driven by a fierce determination fueled by desperate hope. She paused, her fingers hovering above the keyboard that a novel pattern had emerged, a subtle anomaly within the protein structure hinting at a unique vulnerability. She launched another simulation, fine-tuning the parameters, adjusting the variables. The results were definitive. The Xylar protein was susceptible to a specific enzyme, an enzyme that could be synthesized from commonplace terrestrial fungi. It was a perfect fit, a biological lock and key. Alara leaned back in her chair, a faint smile gracing her lips. She had found it. She had discovered the key to breaching the Xylar's defenses. She immediately contacted Thorne, relaying her findings in a rapid, excited torrent of scientific jargon. Thorne listened intently, his voice barely audible above the static of the secure communication channel. "Are you certain?" he inquired, his voice laden with cautious optimism. "Yes, Doctor," Ilara confirmed. "I'm certain that we can accomplish this." The following morning, President Sharma summoned the coalition leaders back to the war room. She stood before them, her face pale but resolute. "I have reached a decision," she announced, her voice clear and unwavering. "We will proceed with Dr. Thorne's plan." A collective gasp swept through the room. The tension was palpable, the atmosphere charged with anticipation and dread. "I comprehend the risks," Sharma continued. "However, I believe the risks of inaction are far more catastrophic. We face annihilation that we must be prepared to undertake whatever measures are necessary to ensure our survival." She met each of their gazes, her gaze unflinching. "This will be a formidable, perilous undertaking, but I have faith in humanity that I believe in our capacity to conquer any obstacle, to endure any hardship. We will fight for our world, for our freedom, for our future." She turned to Thorne. "Doctor, proceed with your preparations. Godspeed." Thorne nodded, his expression grim but resolute. He knew the path ahead would be fraught with peril, but he was prepared. He had a plan, a weapon, and a dedicated team of scientists poised to engage. The desperate gamble had commenced. The fate of Earth hung precariously in the balance. The devil's bargain. Holographic visages flickered, a dispirited mosaic reflecting the war room's gloom. President Sharma surveyed them, each a delegate from the splintered nations now forming the Earth Defense Coalition, their faces landscapes of trepidation and flickering resolve. Hours had passed since the briefing on Dr. Thorne's proposition concluded, yet the ensuing hush resonated louder than any Xylar barrage. "We're cornered," General Ito rasped, the Japanese banner fluttering silently behind his spectral form. "Traditional warfare is a spent force that we're hemorrhaging resources, hope, everything. Thorne's initiative. It's a long shot, a desperate throw, but it's the only option left on the table." A murmur rippled through the digital assembly. The gamble Ito alluded to encompassed far more than just triumph or failure. It involved unleashing something volatile, a force capable of irrevocably reshaping Earth's very biosphere. "With respect, General," Ambassador Du Bois of the nascent African Union interjected, her tone crisp, "are we truly contemplating biological weaponry? Has history taught us nothing? What assurances do we have that this instrument will discriminate against the Xylar? What of our own populations?" Dr. Thorne's meticulously worded guarantees lingered unspoken, his scientific lexicon failing to assuage the primal dread. He had detailed targeted protein sequences, species-specific weak points. Yet the fundamental truth remained stark. They were toying with forces beyond complete comprehension. Sharma leaned forward, her voice steady despite the tremor betraying her anxiety. "Ambassador, I share and understand your apprehensions. However, consider the alternative: unconditional capitulation, the subjugation of humanity, the systematic eradication of everything we cherished. Is that a hazard you are willing to entertain?" Du Bois's image remained stoic. "Surely, there must be another path. Diplomacy, perhaps, a brokered accord?" A brittle laugh echoed from the British representative, Prime Minister Davies. "Negotiation? With the Xylar? They haven't parleyed since they turned our metropolises into wastelands. Their diplomacy is the weight of a jackboot." The debate raged, a tempest of fear, fury, and desperation. Sharma listened, her mind whirling. The enormity of the impending decision pressed down on her. Glimpses of lost advisors, her daughter, haunted her thoughts. The countenances of the billions who entrusted their lives to her judgment. At last, after what felt like an age, she raised a hand. "Enough." Silence descended, the holographic faces pivoting towards her, expectant. "We will proceed with a vote. All in favor of authorizing Dr. Thorne's strategy, signify now." Individually, the representatives registered their choices. Some acted swiftly, decisively. Others hesitated, their faces etched with uncertainty. The tension thickened, a palpable fog of doubt. When the final tally emerged, the outcome stood clear. A majority, though slender, had sanctioned the initiative. Sharma closed her eyes briefly, burdened by the gravity of her choice. She had struck a Faustian bargain. Later, Sharma found herself alone in her office. the city lights casting elongated, distorted shadows across the walls. Marcus Cole, her chief of staff, entered silently, his expression somber. "Madam President," he murmured. "I grasp the rationale behind the decision that I endorse it. But you harbor reservations," Sharma finished for him, her voice laced with weariness. Cole nodded. "This weapon, it's a Pandora's chalice. Even if it proves effective, what will transpire when other nations cultivate comparable capabilities? What will happen when the next extraterrestrial force arrives, and we confront the same predicament?" Sharma sighed. "I am aware, Marcus, I acknowledge the perils. They haunt my waking hours. But we cannot fixate on the distant future. We must first secure the present. And into what sort of world will we be ensuring our survival?" Cole persisted. "One where biological warfare is accepted, where the demarcation between defense and devastation is indistinguishable." Sharma met his gaze, her eyes reflecting profound sorrow. "I cannot answer that, Marcus, that I only know that without a fight, there will be no future to contemplate." Cole moved to the window, gazing out at the sleeping metropolis. "I only hope we haven't engineered our own ruin in our desperate attempt to save ourselves." He turned back to her, his face lined with worry. "And Thorn, are you confident in his trustworthiness? He has always been zealous." "Zealous is an understatement." Sharma massaged her temples. "But desperate times, Marcus, call for desperate measures, that we need him to be fervent, that we need him to achieve success. And if he falls short?" Sharma offered no reply. The silence grew thick, punctuated only by the muted hum of the city's power systems. The question hung, unanswered, a chilling reminder of the stakes involved. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Days spiraled into weeks, each brimming with feverish activity. Dr. Thorne and his team toiled relentlessly in their subterranean laboratory, racing against the clock. Resources were allocated, protocols expedited, and ethical considerations sidelined in the name of survival. Alara Vance, despite her initial reluctance, immersed herself in the undertaking with a newfound ferocity. The image of the Xylar medical facility lingered in her mind, the cold efficiency with which they had experimented on their captives, the notion of turning their own practices against them, exploiting their weaknesses to Earth's advantage, propelled her every action. Meanwhile, along the battle lines, combat raged. Eva Rostova led her guerrilla platoons in audacious strikes against Xylar supply networks, disrupting their logistics and bolstering morale. Ben Carter, leveraging his expertise in Xylar technology, devised new countermeasures to their armaments, providing Earth's forces a fighting chance. Yet, despite their collective efforts, the momentum slowly favored the enemy. The Xylar, their patience wearing thin, tightened their stranglehold on the planet. Cities were leveled, populations displaced, and hopes slowly eroded. The pressure on Thorne to deliver intensified, as he labored without rest, fueled by caffeine and an unwavering determination to validate his theories. He pushed his team beyond their limits, demanding perfection and tolerating no failures. He was a man driven, consumed by a vision of triumph that teetered on mania. One evening, Alara discovered Thorne slumped over his workstation, his face ashen and gaunt. He hadn't slept in days, his eyes bloodshot and distant. "Dr. Thorne," she said softly, "you need rest. You cannot continue at this pace." He lifted his head, his gaze intense. "Rest? There is no time for repose. The Xylar know no rest. They are slaughtering our people. We must complete this work. We must afford them a taste of their own medicine." Alara recoiled at his intensity. "I appreciate your dedication, Doctor, but you are pushing yourself to the brink. You will make errors." "Errors are not permissible," he snapped. "This is our singular opportunity. We cannot afford failure." He returned to his work, dismissing her. Alara watched him for a moment, a growing disquiet settling in her mind. He was succumbing to his own creation, losing himself within the labyrinth of his ambition. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Several days later, the moment of truth arrived. Thorne declared the bioweapon complete. The news reverberated through the coalition like a jolt, igniting a flicker of optimism amid the darkness. The weapon, a microscopic payload of genetically tailored viruses, was engineered to target the specific protein Alara had identified within the Xylar immune response. Its deployment would occur via atmospheric dispersal, blanketing Xylar installations and densely populated areas. The launch was scheduled. For dawn.as, the first glimmers of sunrise broke over the horizon. Sharma stood on the observation platform of the subterranean complex, watching as the missile containing Thorn's invention was readied for launch. Cole stood beside her, his face grave. "Are you certain about this, Madam President?" he inquired, his voice barely audible. Sharma offered no immediate response. She watched as the missile was elevated, its metallic shell gleaming in the emerging light. She imagined her daughter, the countless lives hanging in the balance. "No," she said finally, her voice strained. "I am not certain, but we must attempt it." The countdown commenced. The seconds dripped away, each one a hammer blow against Sharma's resolve. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The missile ignited, its engines erupting. It surged upward, piercing the sky like an incandescent dart. Sharma watched it vanish into the cloud cover, her heart hammering. She had unleashed a plague upon the world. She had made a pact with the devil. Now, all that remained was to wait, racing against time. The air in the subterranean lab was a cloying cocktail of ozone's sharp bite and the sweetish tang of experimental concoctions. Under the spectral luminescence of holographic blueprints, Thorn, wired on 40 hours without sleep, chased data streams with bloodshot eyes magnified by thick lenses, his fingers a blur across the console. Alara Vance, her complexion ashen but her resolve unyielding, meticulously adjusted the bioreactor's nutrient flow. "Thorn, the replication remains erratic. Batch 3's exhibiting antigenic drift," she announced, her voice strained with worry. A guttural curse escaped Thorn's lips. "Damn it all, that we're hemorrhaging time." Zorgan's vice is tightening. With each sunrise, the Xylar consolidate their dominion. Inject a higher concentration of Sigma-9. It should force protein stabilization. Alara hesitated, her fingers hovering over the controls. "At that dosage, Sigma-9 is uncharted territory. We risk unforeseen mutations." "We're out of options, Alara," Thorn retorted, not bothering to glance up. "The Xylar aren't exactly paragons of ethical conduct, are they?" His words resonated in the confined space, a stark reminder of their predicament. Visions flickered behind her eyes. The brutal occupation, acts of callous indifference, the faces of those lost to the invasion. She manipulated the dial, the regulator's hiss a sharp counterpoint to the lab's underlying hum. "Adjusting," she confirmed, her voice betraying none of the anxiety churning within her. "Replication accelerating, monitoring for side effects." Above them, in a repurposed server farm serving as a makeshift command center, Ben Carter wrestled with a serpentine string of code. The room was a disaster area. Empty energy drink cans, a Medusa's coil of cables, and the agitated glow of scavenged Xylar tech defined the space. His mission, breaching the Xylar's planetary defense network, a task akin to performing surgery with a jackhammer. "Come on, you alien sons of bitches," he muttered, his fingers hammering the keyboard. "Show me something." He was hunting for a crack, a loophole, anything that might provide access to the raw materials Thorn desperately needed. The Xylar had choked off Earth's resources, diverting everything to their war effort. Each vial of reactant, each milligram of rare earth element, was more precious than gold. He needed a way to liberate a sliver of their supply. Finally, an anomaly flickered to life within the code. A subtle glitch in the Xylar's seemingly impervious firewall. A grin slashed across Ben's exhausted face. Jackpot! He plunged deeper, exploiting the weakness, rerouting the Xylar's logistical arteries into a controlled feedback loop. Within moments, he had redirected a shipment of vital chemicals, masking the transfer as a routine system error. "Okay, Thorn," he said into his comm, his voice thrumming with adrenaline. "Package en route. ETA 60 mics." Deep below the ruins of what had once been Shanghai, within a sprawling subterranean complex, Chief Engineer Jian Li oversaw the modification of a repurposed missile silo. A man of meticulous habits, his hands bore the ingrained grime of his trade, while his mind was a living blueprint of calculations and schematics. His mission, adapting obsolete Earth technology to deliver Thorn's bioweapon, a feat demanding both resourcefulness and audacity. Increased the guidance system's power output by 15%. He barked at a team of technicians, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Reroute the cooling system to the warhead casing that we cannot afford a premature detonation. The technicians, a disparate assemblage of engineers and former military personnel, scurried into action. Time was a relentless adversary. Each wasted second granted the Xyler further opportunity to solidify their grip, to grind humanity into dust. Jian-Li approached a colossal, cylindrical form dominating the silo that it was a converted ICBM, its nuclear payload replaced with a custom-designed containment unit for Thorn's weapon. Status on integration? He inquired, addressing a young woman soldering wires with laser focus. Nearly complete, Chief, she replied, her eyes glued to her task. Just calibrating the atmospheric dispersal system. Jian-Li nodded, his gaze sweeping over the intricate web of conduits, wires, and sensors festooning the missile. He understood the stakes. He understood the potential repercussions, but he also knew that humanity stood at the precipice. Make it flawless, he commanded, his voice steely. This is our only damn card to play. Back in the lab, Thorn was immersed in simulations, his fingers dancing over the keyboard. The data flowed across the screen, a dizzying kaleidoscope of numbers and graphs. Elara watched him, her brow creased with concern. Thorn, you need to stop, she urged, her voice both gentle and firm. You're pushing yourself beyond the limit. Can't, Elara, he said, his gaze locked on the screen. Too damn much is riding on this. He understood the risks inherent in his creation, that he knew the potential for catastrophic blowback. But he knew, with equal certainty, that the Xyler needed to be stopped. Their barbarity, their arrogance, their unyielding thirst for conquest. It had to cease. Simulations suggest a strong likelihood of success, he murmured, barely audible. But the risk of unexpected mutations remains. Absolute certainty is unattainable. Elara placed her hand on his arm, her touch surprisingly firm. We've done everything within our capability, Thorn, that we must trust the underlying science. He met her gaze, his eyes reflecting a brew of fatigue and unwavering determination. He witnessed the apprehension lurking in her eyes, but also an unbreakable resolve. He nodded slowly. You're right, he conceded. We have to trust in it. The arrival of Ben's shipment triggered a collective release of tension. The chemicals were immediately incorporated into the production cycle, accelerating the bioweapons replication. Thorn and Elara worked in sync, their movements a focused dance of efficiency. Hours later, the containment sphere stood ready. Sleek and metallic, it hummed with harnessed power. Thorn approached it, his eyes filled with equal parts awe and apprehension. It's ready, he announced, his voice a reverent whisper. The moment has arrived. Under heavy guard, the vessel was transported to the missile silo. Jian-Li oversaw the final integration, his movements precise and economical. The missile was elevated into launch configuration, its nose piercing the sky. President Sharma, observing from a secure bunker nestled deep within the Himalayas, felt a wave of nausea threatening to overwhelm her. She had authorized this course of action. She had made the decision to deploy this weapon. That burden pressed down on her, threatening to crush her resolve. Are we prepared? She asked, her voice a mere breath. Affirmative, Madam President, came the reply from a nearby technician. All systems green. Sharma closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and steeled herself. Launch, she commanded, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. The silo doors groaned open, revealing the canopy of stars. The missile ignited, an incandescent eruption of flame and smoke. It screamed into the atmosphere, arcing toward its target, the Xyler's primary command node. Situated in what was formerly North America as the missile tore through the night. Thorn remained in the lab, his eyes riveted to the monitors. He watched as the weapon reached its destination, as the containment shell deployed, as the bioweapon dispersed into the atmosphere. He held his breath, suspended in anticipation, waiting for the results to manifest, waiting to see if humanity might yet have a tomorrow. The silence in the lab was a tangible entity. Elara stood alongside him, her hand clasped tightly in his. Ben Carter monitored from his makeshift headquarters, his fingers poised over the keyboard, ready to address any unforeseen contingency. Jian-Li tracked the telemetry from the silo, his face a mask of concentration. The destiny of humanity hung precariously in the balance. Then, the first reports began to trickle in. Confirmed, a voice crackled over the comms. Target sector displaying indications of biological cascade. Xylar forces reporting disorientation, loss of motor function. Thorn exhaled, a shuddering release of tension. It's working, he whispered, his voice barely audible. It's actually damn working. But the triumph tasted like ashes. That he knew this was only the opening salvo. He knew the Xylar wouldn't surrender without a protracted struggle. And he knew his actions might unleash consequences difficult, if not impossible, to predict. As the sun crested the horizon, painting the ravaged landscape with a muted glow, Thorn turned to Alara, his eyes reflecting equal measures of hope and trepidation. We've bought ourselves a reprieve, he said. But the fight is far from over. The whispers of sickness. A swarm of drones, hundreds strong, former crop dusters now armed with modified nozzles, clawed their way skyward in precise formations. They ascended beyond the decaying husks of skyscrapers and the ever-present smudge of smoke that marred the horizons above once bustling cities. Jian Li's makeshift network throbbed with raw power, a monument to desperate innovation. Thorn, his expression a granite mask, oversaw the launch, watching the first wave melt into the overcast. Now, only anticipation remained. The ensuing hours stretched into an eternity of frayed nerves. The isolated pockets of resistance, scattered like embers, clung to the thin hope that this dangerous wager, this morally ambiguous decision, would grant them respite, the chance to reorganize, rethink, simply endure. Below, in a repurposed subway tunnel serving as a makeshift infirmary under what remained of Paris, Lyra tended to the injured. The faces before her were maps of exhaustion and agony, the human toll exacted by the Xylar occupation a constant, palpable reminder of their struggle. She moved with practiced grace, cleansing wounds, rationing precious antibiotics, offering solace where she could. Yet, a disquieting feeling had begun to fester within her. It transcended the usual bleakness of their existence. Something felt amiss. Lyra. A voice croaked, jarring her from her reverie. That it was Jean-Pierre, an ex-medic who'd lost a leg in a Xylar air raid. He lay pallid on a cot, his features gaunt. Have you observed anything peculiar? Lyra hesitated, swiping her forehead with a grimy hand. Peculiar? How so? The Xylar patrols. They're less alert, it seems, slowered. I even saw one falter earlier. He coughed, a wet, gurgling sound. I question my senses due to the pain, but I've heard similar murmurs from others. Lyra's unease deepened. She'd noted the patrol's diminished frequency and aggression, attributing it to the Resistance's evolving tactics, their growing skill at evasion. But Jean-Pierre's words sowed a seed of apprehension. I'll stay vigilant, she replied, forcing a reassuring smile. Rest now. As she moved to her next patient, her thoughts raced. Could it be possible? Had the bioweapon already taken hold? The prospect was both elating and terrifying. Success meant a fighting chance, but it also meant they had unleashed a force they might be unable to tame. The days that followed brought a consistent stream of reports, each echoing Jean-Pierre's observations. Xylar soldiers displayed symptoms akin to influenza, fevers, chills, aching muscles, and a persistent cough. Their movements were leaden, bordering on listless. Discipline seemed to erode with each passing hour. Lyra watched, her gut twisting. She saw the unease reflected in her comrade's eyes, the unspoken question hanging heavy in the air. Was this a victory, or the prelude to a far darker chapter? One evening, during her rounds, she overheard a hushed conversation between two young recruits. Did you hear about the outpost near Versailles? One whispered. They say half the Xylar garrison is crippled with something that can't even mount a proper guard. Maybe they're finally tasting their own poison. The other retorted, a bitter edge to his voice. Serves them right. Lyra approached, her expression somber. Don't celebrate prematurely, she cautioned quietly. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. But, isn't this what we wanted? The first recruit asked, bewildered. The Xylar are weakened, vulnerable. Yes, Lyra said, her voice hushed. But we don't comprehend this illness that we don't know its trajectory, or how they will retaliate. This could herald something far more perilous than anything we've encountered. She saw understanding dawn in their eyes, the recognition that even a miraculous triumph extracted a toll. Later that night, Lyra found herself alone in a cramped, improvised office. The wavering light from a reclaimed lamp cast elongated shadows across the walls, highlighting the maps and charts that plastered every surface. She fixed her gaze on a map of the occupied zones, her fingers tracing the scarlet lines designating Xylar strongholds. She knew her duty to decipher this affliction, to predict the Xylar response to brace for the worst. She reached for a scarred datapad, its screen fractured and dim. She began compiling incoming reports, dissecting symptoms, locations, patterns. She labored tirelessly, fueled by a cocktail of adrenaline and trepidation. As she probed deeper into the data, she discerned a pattern that sent a shiver through her. The contagion seemed to spread with greater virulence in areas of denser Xylar population, if the pathogen were amplifying within their ranks, increasing its potency with each new host. The terrifying truth slammed into her. They hadn't simply deployed a weapon. They had unleashed a potential pandemic, capable of mutating and leaping beyond their control. The crushing weight of the realization threatened to suffocate her. She had been so fixated on the immediate threat, on the urgency of crippling the Xylar, that she had neglected to consider the broader ramifications. She closed her eyes, burying her face in her hands. She had committed a grave error. But regret was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had to find a means to curb the outbreak, to minimize the devastation. She had to discover a cure. She opened her eyes, her resolve hardening. She would not allow this to consume them. She would not allow past missteps to dictate her future. She would fight, not just against the Xylar, but against the very instrument they had unleashed. She began to develop a strategy, a desperate bid to regain command of the situation. She would need to amass more information, isolate the pathogen, devise a countermeasure. It was a long shot, but their only hope. She knew it would be an uphill battle. The Xylar would be struggling to contain the plague, to safeguard their own forces. They would likely enforce even harsher restrictions, intensifying surveillance and tightening their grip on the populace. But she had to persevere. The fate of humanity, and perhaps that of the Xylar, rested on her shoulders. She reached for her comm unit, her fingers trembling slightly. It was time to reach Thorn. That he had to know the truth. Thorn, this is Lyra, she said, her voice tight with urgency. We have a situation. A serious one. A pause, then Thorn's voice, weary but unwavering. What is it, Lyra? The bioweapon. It's working, she said. But it's also evolving. It's becoming more aggressive, spreading more rapidly than we anticipated. We need to discover a way to contain it before it spirals out of control. Another pause. She could almost sense Thorn's shock radiating through the comm unit. Damn it, he said, his voice laced with weariness. I feared this. We must act swiftly, Lyra urged. I have conceived a plan, but I need your assistance. Explain, Thorn directed, his voice now sharp and focused. What are our next steps? Lyra inhaled deeply, bracing herself for the challenging discussion ahead. She knew her plan was fraught with peril, requiring them to collaborate with the very enemy they were battling. But it was the sole path to avert their doom, and perhaps to save the Xylar from their own ambitions. The contagion's whispers spread, not only among the Xylar, but also within the resistance. Whispers of doubt, of terror, of the stark realization they had unleashed a force beyond their control. Yet, Lyra refused to allow those whispers to drown out the voices of hope, of resilience, of the unyielding determination to survive. The true fight was just beginning, and it was a struggle not only against an adversary, but against themselves. Denial. Admiral Zorgan's gaze swept across the Parisian cityscape rendered in holographic form, the city's captive power grid shimmering like veins beneath its surface. A tap of his sharp, keratinous digit against the display underscored his curt declaration. Sector Gamma 9 patrol density increased. Insurgent activity remains wholly unacceptable. A junior officer, his chitinous armor reflecting the harsh bridge lights, hesitated. Admiral, with all due respect, the ailment is intensifying. Resource allocation is already skewed toward containment protocols. Crimson sparks ignited in Zorgon's reptilian eyes. Ailment? Earth's atmosphere is peculiar. It's water, substandard. Our warriors are acclimating. This world is a refuse heap. They will adjust. A dismissive wave, sharp and abrupt, punctuated his words. Ration increased protein supplements. Implement enhanced hydration. And eliminate ailment from your lexicon. It fosters weakness. Turning back to the holographic representation, his thoughts returned to the wider strategic picture. Pressure from the High Council was mounting. Earth was supposed to be a swift, decisive conquest, a resource bonanza. Instead, it was a suppurating sore, draining Xylar manpower. These humans were proving tenacious, their resourcefulness exceeding all initial forecasts. That a different alarm sliced through the air, a higher, more insistent pitch. The junior officer winced. Admiral, Priority 1 medical report, Outpost Beta 6. Zorgon exhaled, a sound like escaping pressure. Patch it through. The hologram flickered, replaced by the haggard visage of a Xylar medic. His once vibrant jade complexion was now tinged sickly yellow. His mandibles twitched with agitation. Admiral Zorgon, we're experiencing a sharp surge in infected personnel. Symptoms are escalating rapidly. Acute fever, respiratory compromise, internal bleeding. Bleeding? Zorgon's voice rumbled. Are you suggesting our warriors are succumbing to terrestrial pathogens? Initial analyses indicated a localized infection, likely originating from indigenous microorganisms. However, transmission rates are unprecedented. Symptomatology is atypical. The medic paused, swallowing hard. We've isolated the pathogen, but it eludes our databases. Nothing matches our previous conquest records. Zorgon's crest flared. Incompetence, unmitigated incompetence. You are Xylar medical experts, equipped with the galaxy's premier diagnostic tools. Isolate the source, enact quarantine, and eradicate the infection. I will tolerate no excuses. The medic's image stuttered, his face paling further. Sir, we're deploying every measure, but the infection is evolving, resistant to standard treatments. Casualties are mounting at an alarming pace. Zorgon's fist detonated against the console, the tremor rattling the bridge. Silence. Enough defeatist drivel. This is Earth, a primitive backwater. Our warriors are bioengineered for survival in the most hostile conditions. This is a temporary impediment, a fleeting snag. Concentrate on containment and obliteration. That is an order. He severed the connection, silencing the medic's desperate appeal. Scowling, he fixed the junior officer with a glare. Increase bombardment intensity on Sector Delta 12. Reassign the Beta 6 medical team to sanitation duties. Clearly, their expertise is misplaced. Meanwhile, Lyra navigated the makeshift hospital, a former bakery, its air thick with the coppery tang of blood and the sharp bite of disinfectant. It had been transformed into a triage center overflowing with wounded men and women bearing the marks of the resistance. Their faces canvases of pain and weariness, but it wasn't the familiar wounds of battle that weighed on her. It was the coughing, hacking, rattling chorus, an omnipresent soundtrack of ragged breaths and fevered murmurs. She checked on Marie, a young woman caught in a Xylar patrol sweep, her leg shredded by a blaster bolt. Gently, despite the urgency, Lyra cleaned the wound. Marie's skin radiated heat. How are you feeling, Marie? Lyra asked, her voice a soothing balm. Marie's reply was a wrenching cough that convulsed her. Cold then hot. Hard to breathe. Lyra's brow furrowed, her fingers tightening around the bandage. The same pattern persisted. Rapid onset, escalating symptoms. This wasn't some common bug. This was different, terrifyingly so. She found Thorn huddled in a corner, his face illuminated by the spectral glow of a data pad. He looked spent, his features gaunt. Anything? She whispered. Thorn shook his head, frustration clouding his gaze. Nothing solid. The Xylar diagnostic records are encrypted, locked behind firewalls that I can't breach their security, but I found something unsettling. He presented the data pad, a series of thermal scans depicting Xylar soldiers at various stages of infection. A strange anomaly stood out. A concentrated heat signature emanating from the respiratory system, spreading like wildfire through the body. It's as if the infection is generating its own power source, Thorn murmured. Accelerating metabolic processes, consuming them from within. A chill snaked down Lyra's spine. This wasn't merely a biological weapon. It was something more, something volatile, something hurtling out of control. We have to warn them, she urged. We have to get to the Xylar commanders. This isn't just their soldiers. It could breach their lines. It could become a pandemic. Thorn regarded her with skepticism. You think they'll listen? They see us as insurgents, terrorists. They won't credit a word we say. We have to try, Lyra insisted. Lives hang in the balance, theirs and ours. They located a secure channel, a hidden frequency the Resistance used to monitor Xylar transmissions. Thorn patched through Lyra's voice, translating her words into the guttural Xylar tongue. Attention, Xylar command. She began, her voice steady despite trembling hands. This is Lyra Rostova, medical professional. Paris, that we've detected a highly contagious, rapidly evolving infection within your ranks. It is exceptionally dangerous and poses a grave threat to your personnel. We possess data regarding its transmission and potential treatments. That we implore you to heed our warnings and collaborate to contain this outbreak. Static crackled across the line, giving way to a moment of silence. Then, a voice, icily dismissive, filled the channel. Admiral Zorgan. Admiral Zorgan, Xylar Imperium. Your pathetic attempts at deception are transparent. This is a desperate gambit to disrupt our operations. That we are aware of your terrorist activities and will not be swayed by your propaganda. Further interference with our command structure will be met with swift and decisive action. Despair washed over Lyra. Admiral, you misunderstand, she pleaded. This isn't a ruse. This is real. Your soldiers are dying. Act now, or it will be too late. Zorgan's voice hardened. Silence. You are wasting my time. I suggest you focus your efforts on surrendering. Resistance is futile. The Xylar Imperium will not be deterred by your petty schemes. The bombardment of Paris will continue as scheduled. The line went dead, leaving Lyra staring at the device, her heart plummeting. That he didn't believe her. He didn't care. Blinded by arrogance, by unwavering faith in Xylar's supremacy. He's not listening, she whispered, her voice breaking. He's going to let it spread. Thorn placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch unexpectedly comforting. Then we find a way to stop it ourselves. That we find a cure, before we run out of time. But surveying the packed hospital, the faces twisted in suffering and fear, Lyra couldn't shake the premonition that they were already losing. The bioweapon, conceived to strike the invaders, was turning on them, a silent, invisible enemy threatening to devour all. The denial of one powerful being was now sealing their fate, and the weight of that truth settled like a shroud upon her. The tides turned. The reek was undeniable now, a cloying sweetness that overpowered even the familiar metallic tang of Xylar blood. It was a putrescent perfume of rotting fruit laced with industrial coolant, clinging to damp concrete and seeping through the commandeered buildings, leaving a vile aftertaste coating Eva Rostova's throat. It signaled the Xylar's slow, agonizing demise. Isolated reports, initially dismissed as mere battlefield maladies, had swelled into a torrent. The once disciplined Xylar soldiers were collapsing, their armored suits wheezing with failing life support, their guttural moans echoing across the ravaged plazas. The plague was dismantling their ranks. From a rooftop bakery, the lingering sweetness of burnt sugar offered scant relief from the pervasive stench. Below, a Xylar squad, tasked with guarding a crucial intersection, was in shambles. One lay writhing, limbs spasming uncontrollably. Another slumped against a barricade, clutching his helmet in what looked like agony, while a third retched a stream of emerald sludge onto the stained pavement. The fourth, seemingly unaffected, issued orders, his voice cracking with a desperation that betrayed his fraying control. Like shooting fish in a barrel, Ben Carter muttered, appearing beside her, rifle casually held. His normally weary face was alight with grim satisfaction. Looks like Sharma's little surprise is finally showing its teeth. Eva felt no such elation. The bioweapon, the Xylar Blight, as it was grimly dubbed, was a poisoned chalice. She understood the despair that drove Sharma to deploy it, yet the idea of unleashing a plague, even upon their oppressors, left a bitter residue. Don't let your guard down, Ben, she warned, her voice edged with steel. We don't know the long-term fallout from this, and there's no guarantee it'll limit itself to them. Ben shrugged, eyes glued to the failing squad. Whatever, right now, it's buying us precious time, maybe even a real shot at fighting back. He was right. The momentum had shifted. Across the blasted city, similar scenes unfolded. The Xylar infrastructure, once meticulously maintained, dissolved into chaos. Communications sputtered, supply lines withered, and fortresses became death traps. Emboldened, the human resistance stirred from the shadows. Attacks, meticulously planned for months but considered too risky, now surged with a ferocity that took even Eva aback. Small teams, armed with salvaged Xylar weaponry and jury-rigged explosives, lashed out at strategic points, power grids, communication nodes, transport hubs. The aim wasn't outright victory, not yet, but maximum disruption, to further cripple the already buckling Xylar forces. Eva lifted a hand, signaling her team, concealed within the crumbling buildings. All right, time to give these bastards a nudge. The assault was swift and decisive. Snipers eliminated the remaining Xylar from the rooftops, while Eva and Ben led a small team into the intersection. The Xylar, weakened and disoriented, put up a pathetic fight. Within minutes, the area was secured, a meager victory in the brutal struggle for Earth. But as they cleared the carnage, unease lingered. The triumph felt tainted, corroded by the sinister nature of the bioweapon. This was simply the opening salvo, the conflict far from resolution, and she dreaded the ultimate cost of their freedom. Asterisk. Across the city, within the imposing Xylar command center, Jax slammed a fist against the holographic display, shattering the image of a human city consumed by flames. "Report," he bellowed, the sound echoing through the sterile chamber like a thunderclap. A Xylar medic, pale and trembling, stammered, "Lord Jax, the infection is spreading exponentially. Casualties are outpacing replacements. Quarantine efforts have proven insufficient." Jax's 4 eyes blazed with fury. "Insufficient? Explain yourself. Seal off the affected areas. Incinerate the infected. Eradicate this contagion." The medic recoiled. "We have attempted those measures, Lord Jax. But the infection is airborne. It is mutating. It resists all containment." Frustration clawed at Jax. Building to a suffocating rage, he dismissed the initial reports as human propaganda, a desperate ploy to destabilize them. He'd ignored his own medic's warnings, blinded by his hubris and the unwavering belief in Xylar's superiority. Now he was reaping the bitter harvest. The humans, those insignificant insects, had somehow landed a blow that threatened to cripple the entire Xylar occupation. Arrogance, the Xylar's fatal flaw, had blinded them to the true menace lurking within these primitive earthlings. That he recalled the human doctor, Lyra, who had desperately attempted to warn him, her eyes reflecting genuine concern. He'd branded her a traitor, a pawn of the resistance. Now, he wondered if she'd spoken the truth. If her attempts at help had been genuine, he banished the unwelcome thought. Time for introspection was a luxury he could ill afford. He had to quell the infection, recover the situation before it spun entirely out of control. "Initiate Protocol Omega," he commanded, his voice as cold and hard as polished obsidian. The medic gasped, visibly shaken. "Lord Jax, Protocol Omega is a measure of desperation. It will devastate a vast region." "I am cognizant of the ramifications," Jax snapped. "We are left with no alternative. Containment is paramount. Execute the order without delay." Protocol Omega was a scorched earth decree, a last-ditch effort to eliminate any trace of the infection. It entailed deploying potent chemical armaments capable of obliterating entire urban centers. A horrific solution, but the only one Jax perceived that would ensure the survival of his forces. The medic hurried to obey. Jax stared out at the ravaged city, his heart a tangled mess of anger, fear, and a grudging admiration for the human resistance. They had carved a wound that might never fully heal, exposing the vulnerability of the seemingly invincible Xylar Imperium. The war was far from over. The rules of engagement, however, had irrevocably changed. The humans had revealed themselves to be more than the weak, easily subjugated species the Xylar had assumed. Their resilience, ingenuity, and willingness to die for their liberation made them a force to be reckoned with. Jax steeled himself that he would not underestimate them again, that he would crush their defiance, even if it cost him everything. The Xylar Imperium would not fall to a handful of pathetic humans. He would ensure their utter annihilation. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The first indication was subtle, a tremor underfoot, a distant rumble easily mistaken for artillery fire, but Eva recognized the dread precursor. She'd heard it before, during the initial invasion, when the Xylar had unleashed their most devastating power. "Get down," she screamed, shoving Ben towards the ground. Incoming. Seconds later, the sky flared with blinding light that a concussive force slammed into them, hurling them against the bakery wall. The air became a choking, acrid miasma that seared lungs and stung eyes. Eva stumbled to her feet, ears ringing, vision swimming. She scanned the scene in horror. The intersection they'd just seized had vanished, reduced to a smoking crater. Buildings lay in ruins, streets were torn asunder. The air choked with particulate and ash. What in God's name was that? Ben coughed, his face masked in soot. "Protocol Omega," Eva whispered, her voice hollow. "Jax is trying to cauterize the infection by eradicating entire zones." The reality struck her like a physical blow. The Xylar were prepared to sacrifice anything, including their own, to halt the contagion's spread, and the humans, trapped in the crossfire, were paying the ultimate penalty. She gazed out at the devastated landscape, her heart heavy with a profound sense of despair. The tide had turned, but at what horrific price? They had weakened the Xylar, but in doing so, unleashed a cataclysm that threatened to obliterate everything they were fighting to. Salvage. The war had entered an even darker, more perilous chapter, and Eva knew, with cold certainty, that the worst was yet to come. Trapped. Admiral Zorgan stalked the bridge of the invincible fury, his crimson cloak a restless tide behind him. The bilious glare of the display panels painted his scaled features in an unflattering light, each pulse a jab at his legendary composure. Panic, that insidious serpent, threatened to coil around his throat, but he'd sooner choke than yield to it. Xylar knew no retreat, only strategic withdrawals, calculated realignments. "Status report," he detonated, his words a gravelly blast that hushed the bridge crew's anxious chatter. "My Lord Admiral," a junior communications officer stammered, his scales losing their vibrant hue. The Vanguard scouts attempted warp initiation, but all attempts failed. They remained tethered to orbit. Zorgan's grip tightened on his energy blade's pommel. "Elaborate. Incoherent readings, Lord Admiral. Preliminary assessment points to a disruptive magnetic field, abnormally potent. Warp matrix integrity is compromised. Magnetic interference. On this insignificant dust ball." Zorgan scoffed inwardly. "Human subterfuge, undoubtedly. A futile, pathetic delay. Bypass the safety interlocks," he commanded, impatience etching itself onto his face. "Force the jump sequence that I will not suffer fecklessness." A wave of unease spread among the bridge personnel. An exchange of worried glances followed the order. Forcing a warp jump under such turbulent conditions was a high-stakes gamble. "Lord Admiral," with the utmost respect, the chief engineer, a massive Xylar whose claws bore the grime of his craft, ventured. "Forcing the jump could trigger spatial instability. Do we risk the ships fracturing along the dimensional seams?" Zorgan's glare intensified, volcanic heat simmering behind his eyes. "Are you questioning my judgment, Grok?" Grok's throat bobbed, a dry click the only sound. "No, Lord Admiral, but I strongly advise against such a rash course. The magnetic flux is erratic, unpredictable. It feels as if the planet itself is pushing back." "Pushing back?" Zorgan roared, the sound reverberating through the command center. "This inconsequential sphere of mud dares defy the Xylar Imperium. Absurd." He slammed a fist against the console, sending a shower of sparks. "I will not be shackled by geological happenstance. Engineer, devise a solution, and do so with alacrity, or you will find yourself adrift in the void contemplating the repercussions of defiance." Visibly shaken, Grok returned to his station, unleashing a flurry of directives upon his team. The bridge crackled with fervent activity as engineers raced to recalibrate systems, redirect power conduits, and dissect the rogue readings. Minutes stretched into agonizing eternities, each tick of the chronometer ratcheting up the tension. Meanwhile, Zorgan watched the main view screen, frustration festering. Earth hung suspended before them, a mesmerizing swirl of azure and emerald, deceptively. Tranquil, he detected no overt weaponry, no visible manifestation of the interference, no sign of the planet's silent rebellion. And yet, the stark truth remained. The pride of the Xylar Imperium was ensnared. He considered the dire reports from the beleaguered ground forces. The bioweapon had ravaged them, transforming battle-hardened veterans into shivering, fever-racked invalids. Morale had eroded. The humans, emboldened by this stroke of fortune, had launched a series of stinging guerrilla attacks, picking off stragglers and disrupting supply lines. The glorious conquest had degenerated into an ignominious stalemate, and now this a planetary cage, woven from unseen magnetic threads. Report, Zorgan barked, his voice strained with barely leashed fury. Lord Admiral, a flustered technician announced, we've tried to override the warp drive safeties. The system refuses the command. The magnetic density is impenetrable, like striking solid adamant. Zorgan snarled, a guttural sound. Then find an alternative. Siphon power from life support. Sacrifice weapon arrays. I care not how. Simply extricate us from this predicament. The technician recoiled and scrambled back to his console. The bridge crew plunged into a desperate frenzy, their faces glistening with perspiration. The atmosphere thickened with the acrid scent of ozone and burning circuitry. Regardless of their efforts, the magnetic field remained implacable, a silent, invisible bulwark holding the Xylar fleet hostage. As the hours wore on, Zorgan's vaunted arrogance began to chip away. Replaced by a gnawing premonition, he could sense the weight of his officers' gazes, their expressions a blend of trepidation and resentment. The reports were circulating. The truth was inescapable. The invasion teetered on the brink, and now they were trapped, vulnerable, at the mercy of a primitive world that had, through some improbable twist, outmaneuvered them. He turned to his tactical officer, Forlag, a veteran etched with the scars of 1,000 campaigns. Options, Forlag. Forlag hesitated, a grim resignation clouding his eyes. Lord Admiral, our options are constrained. We could attempt to breach the magnetic field with focused energy weapon fire, but the collateral damage to our own vessels would be considerable, and even if we succeeded, we'd be easy prey for human retaliation during our escape. And the alternative? Zorgan inquired, his voice barely audible. Forlag averted his gaze. The alternative is to remain, Lord Admiral, and face the consequences. Zorgan's eyes clenched shut, his face a mask of fury and despair. He had envisioned a triumphant return to Xylar Prime, laden with spoils, hailed as a conquering hero. Instead, he was stranded in orbit around a hostile planet, his fleet crippled, his forces decimated, his reputation in tatters. That he opened his eyes, their fiery intensity rekindled. We will not yield, he declared, his voice regaining its former authority. We will not be broken. We are the Xylar Imperium. We will persevere. We will adapt. We will triumph. He pivoted towards the communications officer. Dispatch a message to all vessels. Prepare for a protracted defensive posture. Rations and power must be conserved. Weapon stores inventoried. Inform the ground forces. Air support will continue for the foreseeable future. The communications officer nodded, visibly relieved. Yes, Lord Admiral. Zorgan knew his words rang hollow, a desperate act of defiance in the face of oblivion. Resources dwindled. The humans, emboldened, would not cease their attacks. He refused to succumb to the creeping darkness of despair. He would fight until the bitter end, even if it meant his grave would be in the orbit of this forsaken world. Earth's sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the Xylar fleet. Zorgan stood on the bridge of the invincible fury, a solitary figure framed by the ghastly luminescence of the status screens. He was trapped, but not defeated. He was a Xylar warrior, and he would stare down his fate with the unyielding resolve of his ancestors. And far below, on the planet's surface, a young medic named Lyra and a disgraced scientist named Thorn fought their own desperate battle against a different kind of oppressor, a microscopic terror threatening to consume them all. All were trapped, caught within a nexus of war, pestilence, and unintended consequences. Their survival hinged on unearthing a path towards escape. Resonance. Thorn was a silhouette against the dancing cerulean light of the holographic display. Code. A torrential downpour of symbols streamed across the screen as he dissected the captured Xyler sensor readings. Beside him, Alaravance's worry was a palpable presence in the cramped, repurposed lecture hall, now a makeshift lab buzzing with straining processors. Find anything? She breathed as he remained absorbed, tracing the jagged spikes that charted the pathogen's volatile behavior. Intercepting that fragment had been a long shot, a last-ditch effort to decipher the bioweapon's erratic actions. Devised for precise decimation, its current behavior was baffling. The proliferation, it's geometric, Thorn finally croaked. Beyond our projections, almost enhanced. A tremor ran through Alara, despite the room's close air. Enhanced how? We factored in Xyler biology that IT was designed for their vulnerabilities. Thorn magnified a sharp upswing in the pathogen's energy signature. Their biology is immaterial that it's not them that it's. His finger, unsteady, stabbed at a projected topographical map of Earth. The resonance frequencies, they align almost perfectly with the planetary magnetic field. Alara's eyes widened, disbelief warring with comprehension. The magnetic field, are you implying Earth is exacerbating it? More than that, Thorn corrected, a chilling satisfaction tinging his voice. It's optimizing it. The pathogen's architecture, the modified viral capsid, it unwittingly spawned a resonant chamber. Our planet's magnetic field is acting as a colossal amplifier, supercharging its virulence, its reproductive rate, everything. He tapped the screen, highlighting a complex weave of waveforms. We understood Earth's magnetic field was unusually robust, a consequence of its geological evolution, but we overlooked its potential for molecular interaction with the bioweapon. Obsessed with the Xyler, we ignored the environment. Alara raked a hand through her hair, her face a canvas of anxiety. So, in practical terms, what does this signify? Thorn's gaze sharpened. It signifies the Xyler are facing a reckoning far exceeding their expectations. He summoned another data set, gleaned from independent surveillance satellites, showing the Xyler fleet, ensnared in Earth's orbit, in grim detail. Observe the energy emanating from their vessels, he directed. They aren't just containing the pathogen anymore, they're radiating it. The magnetic field is triggering a cascading resonance, transforming their ships into bioreactors. On the display, the Xyler ships pulsed with a baleful crimson aura. Their calculated strike was devolving into a spiraling calamity, a nightmare woven from unintended consequence. Aboard the Xyler Pride, the trapped fleet's command vessel, the situation worsened by the hour. Commander Varkos, a hardened veteran of countless campaigns, was racked by a violent cough, the sound echoing hollowly on the bridge. His face was flushed, his eyes injected with blood. "Report," he rasped, his voice shredded. Lieutenant Zara, her face a pallid mask, struggled to maintain composure. "Commander, the contagion, it's spreading unchecked. Crew containment protocols are failing. The medical bays are overwhelmed. We're losing personnel at a critical rate." Varkos's knuckles gleamed white as he gripped the arms of his command chair. He'd initially dismissed the reports as simple space sickness, a frequent complaint among newly arrived crews. This, however, was different, more aggressive, more brutal. "Environmental controls?" he demanded. "The filters? The quarantine seals?" Zara hesitated, a beat too long. "The filters, they're being saturated, Commander. The pathogen is evolving, adapting, it's circumventing standard filtration. The seals, they're compromised that IT appears to be corroding them." A wave of nausea crested over Varkos. He felt a searing ache in his lungs, a tightening vice around his chest. Another spasm ripped through him. "Seal off Sector Gamma," he ordered, his voice fading. "Initiate full decontamination protocols. Those exhibiting symptoms are to be isolated." The last word choked in his throat. Zara nodded, her face a tableau of dread. She understood the implication of isolated. It was a grim euphemism for execution, a brutal necessity to halt the spread. But even as she relayed the orders, she understood their futility. The contagion was pervasive, woven into the air, the water, the very molecular structure of the ship. In the narrow confines of a lower-deck engineering bay, Technician Grok huddled with 3 other crew members. The air hung heavy with sweat, disinfectant, and the metallic tang of fear they had sealed themselves in, employing makeshift barriers and emergency sealant. Yet they knew such measures were only delaying the inevitable. "How much longer can we remain here?" asked Rella, a young engineer, her eyes wide with terror. Grok shook his head grimly. "The sealant won't hold. The pathogen dissolves it like acid. And the air, it's growing thin." "We must attempt something," declared Phelan, a grizzled veteran of numerous conflicts. "We can't simply await our demise." "What do you propose?" Grok asked, his voice tinged with despair. Phelan gestured toward a maintenance hatch leading to a seldom-used access tunnel. "There's an ancient ventilation shaft that terminates at the outer hull. Its seal isn't as rigorous as the primary systems that it might be possible to vent the pathogen into space." Rella gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "But the vacuum, we'd be exposed." "There's a risk involved," Phelan conceded. "But it's preferable to certain death that we can utilize emergency breather masks and thermal suits that won't be pleasant, but it might afford us some reprieve." Grok surveyed the others, their faces etched with stark fear, yet flickering with a nascent ember of hope that it was a reckless gamble, a desperate Hail Mary, but it was all they possessed. "Very well," he said, his voice surprisingly steady despite his churning fear. "Let's proceed." Thorne observed the data stream emanating from the Xylar vessels, a mixture of trepidation and grim satisfaction warring within him. The pathogen was rampaging through their ranks, transforming their technologically advanced ships into floating crypts. "The resonance is even more pronounced than we initially calculated," he stated, his voice hollow. "The ships are functioning as amplifiers, broadcasting the pathogen across the entirety of the fleet." Alara stared at the screen, her face ashen. "This is that horrendous that it eclipses anything we anticipated. We unleashed a force we failed to fully comprehend," Thorne replied, his voice barely audible. "We presumed to play God, and we are now reaping the whirlwind." He comprehended the tragedy befalling the Xylar, a galactic-scale catastrophe, yet he remained unable to summon remorse. They had invaded Earth to conquer, enslave, and obliterate. They had offered no quarter. Why should he extend them any? But deep within, a nagging unease persisted. Was this victory, or the prelude to an even greater calamity? Had they unleashed something beyond their control, an entity that would ultimately consume them? The readings from the Xylar vessels shifted once more, spiking. Erratically, Thorne zoomed in, his brow furrowed in concentration. "What is it?" Alara's voice was tight with anticipation. "Mutation," Thorne whispered, his voice barely a sigh. "The pathogen is evolving, adapting to this new environment, and it's occurring rapidly." He watched, transfixed, as the data stream morphed, transmuting before his very eyes. The pathogen was changing, becoming something novel, something unpredictable. And as he stared at the screen, a chilling realization pierced him. The resonance wasn't merely amplifying the pathogen's virulence, that it was accelerating its evolution, that in doing so, it was forging something far more menacing than anything they had ever conceived. The enemy was no longer confined to the Xylar, that it was something else. Entirely, something gestated by Earth, perverted by technology, and amplified by the fundamental forces of nature. And it was propagating, unchecked, throughout the Xylar fleet, poised to unleash its fury upon an unsuspecting galaxy. The Earth's magnetic field had become weaponized, but it was a weapon equally capable of destroying them. The resonance was a double-edged sword, its hum a siren song of destruction. Scorched Earth. Admiral Zorgan's gaze locked onto the wavering holographic display, ruby alerts glinting in his scaled eyes. The Dominator, once the Xylar fleet's star jewel, was now a gilded cage. The magnetic storm, a cacophony of energy unraveling every system, intensified. Reports poured in. Crew collapsing from the swiftly evolving plague, starships crippled, communications severed. His once disciplined invasion force devolved into pockets of terrified survivors and grotesque, warped nightmares that he slammed a claw against the console, the jolt shaking the already precarious platform. "Silence," he bellowed, his voice amplified and garbled by the failing comm system. The motley collection of officers before him recoiled. Are we Xylar, or quivering worms? We came to reign, and reign we shall. A junior communications officer, his scales paling under the sickly chartreuse emergency lights, dared to speak. Admiral, projections they are unfavorable. The pathogen's mutation rate spikes exponentially. Containment is impossible. The effects on our starships defy description. He stammered, unable to capture the creeping horror. Zorgan knew, or at least, he had ignored the warnings. Now, the sharp reek of putrefying tissue assaulted his nostrils via the ventilation conduits, and guttural cries echoed from plague-ridden decks. The ships became breeding grounds, the Xylar warriors' fuel for a virulent blaze. Then we cauterize, Zorgan declared, his voice a frigid rasp. We sanitize. Protocol Omega. A collective intake of breath swept the room. Protocol Omega. Planetary cauterization. The ultimate contingency, reserved for scenarios where dominion was unachievable and the contamination risk insurmountable, that IT meant unleashing a focused energy torrent, potent enough to scour the planet's surface, immolating all organic material. That IT meant sacrificing not only the remaining human resistance, but marooned Xylar forces as well. Admiral, with respect, a veteran tactical officer interjected, viable assets remain planetside, and our own combatants. Expediency, Zorgan snapped, his eyes burning with glacial fury. Permissible, the Imperium's survival eclipses the lives of a few, or many. The humans unleashed this pestilence. They will offer the supreme sacrifice that we deny them this world, even in death. He activated the primary command station, his digits dancing across the encoded interface. The authorization codes, the ultimate failsafe. He hesitated a millisecond, the magnitude of his choice weighing upon him like the oppressive gravity of a collapsing star, but the visions of his expiring comrades, the accounts of the inexorable contagion, steeled his will. For the Imperium, he hissed and initiated the sequence. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Lyra huddled behind a fractured concrete embankment, the gritty taste of apprehension coating her mouth. The atmosphere hung thick with the metallic tang of shed blood and the pungent odor of scorched polymers. Another Xylar patrol had razed through the ruins of a once vibrant city block, leaving desolation and carnage. Survival had become a desperate ballet of attrition, ambush, asymmetrical warfare. Anything to slow the Xylar advance, and by Thorn time for a curative. Yet, the cure seemed more remote than ever. Reports from the front lines grew increasingly dire. The pathogen mutated, evolving into something exponentially more virulent. Then there were whispers of something far more insidious, emerging from the Xylar ships above. She inventoried her medkit, fingertips tracing the precious ampoules of experimental concoctions. Hope, distilled into milliliters of fluid. Enough, perhaps, to redeem a small clutch of lives. But against this tide of fatalities, it felt insignificant. A low, guttural moan snagged her attention. Peering over the barricade, she spotted a Xylar soldier supine in the debris. His armor was cracked and seared. He clutched at his breastplate, breaths coming in ragged gasps. His scales were marred by grotesque lesions. Weeping a virulent, viridescent ichor, Lyra wavered. This was her enemy, the aggressors who shattered her world, who stole everything. Yet, he was also afflicted, a casualty of the same plague devastating humanity. He was perishing. She crawled out. From behind the barrier, her weapon raised but her hand trembling. She closed the distance. The soldier looked up, reptilian eyes brimming with anguish and confusion, but he tried to speak, managing only a wet, gurgling sound. Kneeling beside him, Lyra's heart hammered in her chest. She withdrew from her medkit an ampoule of broad-spectrum antibiotic that IT would likely fail against the mutant pathogen, but it was all she had to proffer. Preparing the injection, a flash of light snagged her eye. She looked up to see a Xylar dropship plummeting from the heavens. Weapons primed. IT wasn't zeroing in on her, or the dying soldier. IT was targeting everything. Then she heard it. A rising, keening whine, reverberating in her bones. A sound never heard before, yet instinctively understood. It was the sound of pure, unleashed energy. Realization dawned. They weren't merely trying to execute her or the soldier. They were trying to extinguish it all. No, she breathed, her voice lost amidst the crescendoing whine. They wouldn't. But they would. They were. The dropship unleashed its payload that a searing white blaze engulfed the area, followed by a crushing wave of heat. She threw herself over the dying soldier, shielding him as best she could. The world evaporated into a roaring inferno. When the light receded, Lyra lay gasping, ears ringing, body throbbing. The soldier beneath her was still, his body charred and devoid of life. The surrounding structures reduced to plumes of smoke. The air reeked of ozone and carbonized flesh. She had survived, but what remained? Then, static crackled over her comm unit, a garbled message, barely decipherable, yet she recognized the Xylar command frequency. She strained to parse the fragments. Protocol Omega, planetary sanitization, no quarter. The message terminated abruptly. Lyra stared at the ruined panorama, her mind reeling. Planetary sterilization. They intended to obliterate everything. Every human, creature, plant, every vestige of life on Earth. They would even sacrifice their own troops in the process. Nausea gripped her. She had battled for humanity, against the Xylar invaders. Now, the enemy wasn't just HFY was the ruthless ambition that drove them. The will to sacrifice anything in their lust for dominion. She looked down at the dead soldier, his face frozen in agony. He had been a pawn, just like her. Now, he was erased. Lyra made a choice. She could no longer fight for humanity, not if it meant mirroring the Xylar. She would not fuel this cycle of annihilation. She would fight for something else. For choice, for the opportunity to cultivate a new dawn, for a flicker of humanity worth shielding in the heart of darkness. Activating her comm unit, she switched to a secure frequency. "This is Lyra," she began, her voice trembling but resolute. "I have intel on Protocol Omega that I need to speak with your leader." President Sharma sat in the war room, her countenance reflecting utter fatigue. The holographic Earth shimmered before her, speckled with crimson markers denoting Xylar fortresses and battle zones. The reports offered nothing but despair. The pathogen raged unchecked, the Xylar's grip tightened, and rumors of an orbital doomsday device persisted. She had aged decades in months. The oppressive weight of authority, the inexorable tide of calamitous news, the knowledge that millions rested upon her, it was almost too much to bear. "Madam President," General Ramirez stated, his voice somber. "We intercepted a Xylar communication. They appear to have initiated Protocol Omega." Sharma's heart plummeted. She'd heard hushed mentions of such a measure, a last-ditch effort to deny their foes a planet they couldn't control. She had dismissed these as propaganda, scare tactics. Now, it seemed irrevocably real. "What does Protocol Omega entail?" she whispered. "Planetary sterilization, Madam President," Ramirez answered. "A directed energy pulse designed to extinguish all organic life." A frigid dread settled over Sharma. She had made hard choices, ethically compromised choices, for the sake of survival. Yet, she never imagined it culminating in this. The fate of humanity poised on the precipice of annihilation. "How long?" she asked, voice trembling. "Intelligence suggests deployment within 24 hours, Ramirez informed. "We are mobilizing our remaining assets, but our defenses are limited." Sharma closed her eyes, her mind desperately searching for an answer. 24 hours to save humanity. That IT seemed impossible. Yet, she couldn't surrender. She wouldn't. "Contact Dr. Thorne," she commanded, her voice regaining some force. "Urge him to expedite the cure, and contact every government, organization, individual who might offer assistance. That we must discover a way to thwart this pulse, or at least lessen its impact." She opened her eyes, fixing her gaze on the holographic map. The red markers throbbed with wicked energy, threatening to devour the planet. "We will not yield," she declared, her voice ringing with defiance. "We will resist, we will endure. That we are humanity, and we will not be extinguished." The shield. Thorne's hands flew across the ancient keyboard, a frantic dance dictating the fate of billions. The server room's low drone vibrated up through his threadbare boot soles, a constant pulse that had become his life's grim baseline. Days blurred into nights, fueled by stale coffee and a single, consuming purpose: to dismantle the Xylar's scheme. Lyra's intelligence had been the linchpin. The ultimate revelation allowing him to intercept Zorgan's nefarious plan, Protocol Omega, planetary annihilation. The phrase tasted like poison on his tongue that he ignored the hollowness in his gut, the nagging exhaustion threatening to drown him. Duty called. His eyes darted between the cascading code filling the monitor and the blueprint of the planetary defense system etched into his memory. Project Icarus. Conceived decades ago as asteroid insurance, it had been mothballed, a victim of budget cuts and bureaucratic inertia. Until now, until Thorn resurrected it from digital oblivion, repurposing it for a conflict unforeseen. Almost there, he croaked, his voice rusty from disuse. The air thrummed with potential energy, the aged machines groaning under duress. He'd pushed them beyond their breaking point, overclocking processors and rerouting power with an audacity that would have shocked his former colleagues. But it was essential that IT had to function, that a progress bar crept toward completion. Each increment of victory hard-earned. He could almost taste the sterilizing wave coalescing on the Xylar flagship, a torrent of destruction aimed at Earth that he had scant minutes, if that, to raise the shield. Sweat slicked his brow, blurring his vision, but he swiped it away. Focus unwavering. Failure was not an option. Not now. Not after everything sacrificed. The progress bar maxed out. A chime, jarringly cheerful in the sterile space, signaled completion. Without hesitation, Thorn slammed his fist onto the activation key, a shot of pure adrenaline electrifying his system. The server room lights flickered, dimmed, then surged back to life, intensified. The low hum intensified, resonating deep in his core. And on the monitor, diagnostic readouts scrolled in a blur, validating the system's activation. Project Icarus was operational. He tracked the sensor data, breath caught in his throat, his heart hammering. He'd modeled the pulse trajectory, predicted its unique energy signature, and tailored the shield to counteract it. But models were just theory. Reality was a far more unpredictable beast. That a crimson bleep flared on the long-range scanner, expanding rapidly in size and menace. The sterilizing burst. IT was inbound. He froze, eyes riveted to the monitor. The shield, a lattice of energy projected into the upper atmosphere, flickered into being, an invisible bulwark against extinction. The pulse impacted the shield with colossal force. The server room lurched violently, the floor shuddering. Alarms shrieked, red lights strobing wildly. He braced himself, expecting a cataclysmic overload, a complete system collapse. But it stood firm. Energy readings spiked, then steadily declined. The shield was diverting the assault, deflecting its devastating power across the high atmosphere. At a stunning, if terrifying, light display erupted, a multicolored aurora unlike any seen in recorded history. Thorn watched, transfixed, as the pulse dissipated, its energy neutralized by the atmosphere. The alarms died, the red lights winked out, and the server room resumed its monotonous hum. He slumped back, his body leaden with fatigue. He'd done it, he'd saved them. A wave of relief crashed over him. Nearly buckling his knees, he shut his eyes, relishing the moment, the quiet, the awareness that humanity had earned another sunrise. Then, a fresh alarm blared. He shot upright, his heart leaping into his throat. What now? Had the shield failed after all? Was this a follow-up attack? He frantically searched the monitor for the alert's origin. IT wasn't a system malfunction. IT was an incoming transmission. He hesitated, then activated the speaker. A voice burst through, thick with disbelief and jubilation. Is this really you, Thorn? It was President Sharma. Her voice was tight, but alive. He cleared his throat, his voice still gravelly. Yes, Madam President. It's me. A spontaneous cheer erupted in the background, a riot of joy and relief. He could hear shouts, laughter, tears. Thorn, Sharma said, her voice trembling with emotion, you magnificent son of a bitch, you actually pulled it off. He allowed himself a small, weary grin. I did what I could, Madam President. What you did was rescue the world, she stated emphatically. The Xylar, we witnessed it. The sky exploded with light. We thought it was the end. And then, nothing. Just the most breathtaking aurora imaginable. He gave a concise, factual account of Project Icarus, the shield, Lyra's intel. He omitted emotion. He wasn't designed for sentiment. I can't begin to thank you, Thorn, Sharma said, her tone softening. You've granted us a reprieve. Just utilize it wisely, Madam President, he cautioned. This doesn't alter the fundamentals. The Xylar remained that they'll adapt. We understand, she replied. But for now, we possess hope, something we haven't felt in a very long time. The transmission ceased. The server room plunged back into silence. Thorne stared at the monitor, his mind racing. He had bought them time, certainly, but time was a finite commodity. The Xylar would dissect the shield, expose its vulnerabilities, and adjust. They always did. He needed a deeper strategy. He needed to discover a way to turn the tide. To strike at the Xylar in a way that truly mattered, he needed a win condition. He surveyed the Project Icarus schematic on the wall, his gaze lingering on the energy emitters. He had configured them to generate a shield. But what other applications did they have? An idea began to germinate. A bold, borderline reckless scheme. It was fraught with risk, bordering on madness. But it just might succeed. He settled back at the keyboard, his fingers poised over the keys. There was much to be done. Across the planet, people emerged from their bunkers and shelters, squinting in the daylight. They gazed at the sky, still shimmering with the residual energy of the shield, a silent testament to their salvation. They had been spared. For the moment, in the streets, celebrations broke out. People embraced, kissed, cheered, sobbed. They had peered into the abyss, and the abyss had blinked. Yet beneath the jubilation, a sense of foreboding persisted. They knew the Xylar were relentless. They knew this conflict was far from its conclusion. But for now, they allowed themselves to dream. They allowed themselves to entertain the possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, they stood a chance on the Xylar flagship. Admiral Zorgan glared at the Earth, his face contorted with fury. Protocol Omega had floundered. The shield had repelled the pulse. He had been outmaneuvered. Humiliated, he slammed his fist against the console, shattering the view screen. Uncover everything about this shield, he bellowed. I require its operational principles, its weak spots, every detail. Immediately, his officers scrambled to comply, their faces ashen with terror. They knew the extent of Zorgan's wrath. He turned from the wreckage of the view screen, his eyes burning with rage. He would not be conquered. He would not be denied his prize. He would devise a method to breach the shield. He would devise a method to sterilize the planet. And this time, there would be no survivors. He would cleanse the Earth until only ash remained. It was the only path to secure the Xylar Imperium's dominance. It was the only path to satisfy the Emperor. He would not fail a second time. The tenacity of humanity had only fueled his determination. Their defiance would be crushed with ruthless finality. The Emperor demanded it, and Zorgan would deliver. He would see this through, irrespective of the cost to the Xylar legions under his authority, the cost to the human resistance, or the cost to his own soul. The Earth would be his, one way or another. He would not permit a single planet to defy the Xylar Imperium. He would make an example of this world, demonstrating the futility of resistance against the might of the Xylar, and the galaxy would tremble at the name of Zorgan. Chain reaction. Admiral Zorgan, his features carved into a rigid tableau of rage, observed the shimmering holographic projection dance with phantom victories. The Icarus shield, that infuriating, improbable bulwark, represented merely a temporary obstacle. Though Protocol Omega had faltered, the sterilization wave hurtled toward the planet, a failsafe measure designed to scour it clean before a more precise second assault. He had presided over the eradication of a dozen worlds, each rendered sterile with detached efficiency. Earth would prove no exception. Status, he snapped, the command cracking across the bridge like static. The crew, normally paragons of efficiency and subservience, now twitched with nervous energy, their movements spastic. Sterilization wave deployed, Admiral. A junior officer stammered, his multifaceted eyes mirroring raw dread. Estimated time of arrival, 37 cycles. Zorgan formed a spire with his chitinous digits, a gesture usually reserved for moments of exquisite triumph. This was not such a moment, but the wave would remedy the situation. It would cleanse the planet of the complications introduced by the failed bioweapon. Following this, a reinforced and utterly merciless contingent of ground troops would secure the ravaged remains. Increase the planetary bombardment by 15%, he rumbled, his voice a deep, resonant threat. Let them taste our displeasure in their final hours. The officer swallowed hard, then relayed the directive. The heavy silence descended on the bridge, punctuated only by the thrum of the engines and the distant thunder of orbital cannons. Zorgan permitted himself a sliver of satisfaction. He could almost taste the acrid tang of Earth's demise. Then, the klaxons erupted, not the measured, controlled alerts indicating incoming ordnance or minor malfunctions. These were strident, panicked shrieks that tore through the air like shattered crystal. "Report," Zorgan bellowed, his composure shredding. The same young officer, now pale as a corpse, extended a trembling appendage toward the primary display. "Admiral, the sterilization wave. It's interacting with the planetary pathogens, but in an unforeseen manner." The display was a maelstrom of flashing glyphs and scrambled data streams that Zorgan's augmented vision struggled to decipher the chaos. He slammed a fist against the control console, the force reverberating through the metal. "Explain. In terms even a combat drone could process. The wave, Admiral, it's enhancing the pathogens. The interaction is triggering a cascading reaction." A glacial dread gripped Zorgan's carapace. The sterilization wave was intended to neutralize organic matter, to unravel complex proteins and DNA. But the bioweapon, it was designed to mutate, to adapt, to defy classification. "Impossible," he snarled. "The wave is calibrated to." Before he could finish, a tremor ripped through the flagship, slamming him against a nearby console. Sparks showered down, and the air filled with the sharp scent of incinerated circuitry. "Damage report," he yelled, struggling to find his footing. "Hull breach, Section 4, multiple system failures. We're losing power." On the main display, the pandemonium amplified. Instead of the orderly cleansing of the planet, the screen depicted a network of pulsating, bioluminescent veins spreading across the surface like a malignant growth, and those veins were reaching outward toward the fleet. "What in the void is happening?" Zorgan screamed, his voice cracking with disbelief. Another tremor, more violent this time, convulsed the ship. Lights flickered and died, plunging the bridge into near-total darkness. Emergency lights flickered on, painting grotesque shadows across the petrified faces of the crew. Then came a report that chilled Zorgan to his very core. "Admiral, vessels are reporting biological contamination. The pathogens are adapting to Xylar physiology." The sterilization wave, intended to eradicate the alien plague, was now weaponizing it against his own forces. The irony bordered on unbearable. He staggered toward a viewport, his multifaceted eyes widening in abject horror. In the distance, a Xylar cruiser erupted in a blinding nova of bioluminescent energy. The light pulsed outwards, engulfing the vessel in seconds, leaving behind only a cloud of vaporized metal and something else, something shimmering and indistinct, like heat haze. Then another vessel detonated, and another. The fleet, once an icon of irresistible power, was being devoured from the inside out. Zorgan felt a wave of nausea crest within him. He had witnessed countless battles, countless atrocities that he had seen worlds incinerated and civilizations reduced to ash, but he had never seen anything like this. This was not war. This was biological oblivion. "Order an immediate retreat," he shrieked, his voice ragged. "Initiate hyperspace jump, now." But it was too late. The pathogens, energized and weaponized by the sterilization wave, were propagating faster than any vessel could escape. They rode the energy crests of the wave, infiltrating shields, circumventing security protocols, rewriting the very essence of Xylar biology. Another explosion rocked the flagship, this one closer than the last. The bridge buckled, and sections of the ceiling imploded. Zorgan felt a jolt of pain in his leg as debris struck him. "Report," he croaked, his voice a bare whisper above the cacophony. "We're losing life support, Admiral. The pathogens are in the ventilation system. They're transmuting us." Zorgan surveyed the bridge. The crew was in the throes of panic, their bodies spasming, their skin shimmering with an unearthly, sickly emerald hue. Some were screaming, others were mute, their eyes vacant and unfocused. He felt a peculiar sensation himself, a tingling in his extremities, a searing in his lungs that he glanced down at his hand and watched his chitinous plating begin to crack and distort, replaced by something softer. Something organic, he attempted to scream, but no sound escaped, he felt. His consciousness unraveling, his thoughts dissolving into a chaotic swirl of images and sensations. He was losing himself, he was becoming something else entirely. Then, oblivion. When Zorgan regained awareness, he was sprawled on a cold, metallic floor. His head pulsed with pain, and his body throbbed. He attempted to move, but his limbs felt leaden and unresponsive. He opened his eyes to find himself in a small, dimly lit cell. The walls were featureless, save for a single observation window that he struggled to sit up, his movements awkward and uncoordinated. Through the window, he saw a figure approaching that it was human. Lyra. She stood before the window, her expression inscrutable. She wore a plain, utilitarian uniform, her hair drawn back in a severe braid. She appeared weary, but her eyes held a glint of steely resolve. "Admiral Zorgan," she stated, her voice cool and detached. "Welcome to Earth." Zorgan attempted to speak, but his throat was parched, and his voice failed him. He stared at her, his multifaceted eyes reflecting a mix of hatred and bewilderment. What transpired?" he managed to croak, his voice barely audible. Lyra tilted her head slightly, as if carefully choosing her words. "Your sterilization wave misfired spectacularly. It amplified the pathogens, turning them against your own fleet. The results were catastrophic." Despair washed over Zorgan, his fleet annihilated, his mission a failure. And he, Admiral Zorgan, terror of 100 worlds, reduced to a prisoner of these humans. "Impossible," he rasped. "The Xylar Imperium, we are invincible." Lyra offered a sad, knowing smile. "Everyone is vulnerable, Admiral. Even the mighty Xylar Imperium. You simply required a little assistance from yourselves." She paused, her eyes narrowing into slits. "You unleashed a weapon you lacked the means to control. You sought to sterilize a planet, and instead, you sterilized your own armada." Zorgan gazed at her, his mind reeling. He had underestimated the humans. He had underestimated their resilience, their ingenuity, their willingness to resort to any measure. What is your intention?" he asked, his voice trembling. Lyra stepped closer to the window, her eyes locking with his. "That depends, Admiral, on your willingness to cooperate." She paused again, her expression hardening into granite. "We have numerous questions concerning the Xylar Imperium, concerning your strategies for Earth, concerning the bioweapon." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "And concerning how we can prevent this abomination from ever recurring." Zorgan stared at her, his mind a tempest of conflicting thoughts. He knew that cooperation meant betraying his people, divulging their secrets, assisting the enemy. But he also knew that resistance was futile. He was a prisoner, stripped of his power, his authority, his very identity. He looked at Lyra, at her unwavering gaze, at the strength and determination etched in her features. He saw not just a human, but a symbol of defiance, a testament to the unyielding spirit of a species that refused to be broken. And for the first time in his long and brutal existence, Admiral Zorgan experienced a flicker of respect. "What do you wish to know?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Lyra smiled again, a cold, calculating smile that promised no mercy. "Everything, Admiral, that we wish to know everything." And so, the interrogation commenced. The hunter had become the hunted, the conqueror, the conquered. The sterilization wave, intended to seal humanity's doom, had instead triggered a sequence of events that decimated the Xylar fleet and delivered Admiral Zorgan into the clutches of his enemies. The war was far from concluded, but the balance of power had shifted, and Earth, against all odds, had bought itself another day of survival, prisoner of war. A frigid draft snaked through Zorgan's confinement, a biting contrast to the meticulously regulated climates he commanded. More than the cold, the captivity gnawed at him, a sensation of utter helplessness. The cell's walls, crafted from an inscrutable composite, were slick and barren, reflecting the pale glare of the lone lamp in a way that amplified the meager space into a suffocating void. Perched on the Spartan cot, its course weave a surprising torment. His colossal form seemed diminished by the cell's cramped dimensions. The only sound was the wheeze of the ventilation, a constant, mocking reminder that his very breath was a gift from his adversaries. Admiral Zorgan, vanquisher of countless worlds, reduced to this. The door side open, admitting two figures. Leading was a woman in a severe gray suit, her face etched with fatigue, yet her eyes burned with implacable resolve that he recognized her from the holoscreens. President Anya Sharma, leader of this stubbornly resistant planet. Behind her stood a younger man, clad in a lab coat, his features hidden behind a data slate. Sharma halted a few paces from the cot. Admiral Zorgan, she began, her tone even, yet firm. I trust your accommodations are sufficient. Zorgan straightened, attempting to reclaim some semblance of authority. They are wanting, he rumbled. I invoke the articles of the Geneva Accords. A wry amusement flickered across Sharma's lips. The Geneva Accords don't precisely address interstellar aggressions, Admiral. Furthermore, your forces showed little such regard for our population centers. She indicated the man with the slate. This is Dr. Chun that he has inquiries regarding the amplified pathogens your sterilization pulse unleashed. Zorgan's mandibles clicked in irritation. A regrettable miscalculation. Regrettable? Chun finally looked up, his gaze blazing with barely contained fury. Regrettable. It decimated entire metropolises. It's miraculous that anyone survived. Sharma placed a steadying hand on Chin's forearm. Dr. Chin feels passionately about this. Admiral, perhaps you could illuminate the pathogen's properties, its structure, its weaknesses? Zorgan hesitated. To divulge information would betray the Imperium, a sign of capitulation. Yet the alternative was to fester in this cell, a useless token, and conceivably, just conceivably, deciphering the science behind the catastrophe might alleviate the consequences. The pathogen was tailored to target human DNA, he conceded, his voice a low rasp. The intention was to induce infertility, a gradual decline in the population. The pulse was designed to hasten its spread. And the augmentation? Chin pressed. What triggered its virulence? Zorgan released a sigh. The pulse interacted with endemic microorganisms in Earth's biosphere that a wholly unforeseen, synergistic reaction occurred. The existing pathogens were amplified, their destructive potential escalating exponentially. Unforeseen. Sharma arched an eyebrow. Or deliberately dismissed. Zorgan remained mute that he knew the truth. The Imperium scientists had been cognizant of the potential hazards, but the allure of a swift victory had eclipsed their concerns. The Imperium had become complacent, swollen with its technological might. They had ignored the perils of arrogance. We need the countermeasures, Chin declared urgently. Our people's survival hinges on it. Zorgan shook his head. None exist. The pathogen is evolving, adapting. Any attempt to formulate a universal antidote would be an exercise in futility. Sharma's expression hardened. That is unacceptable. There must be something. What of the original research, the data utilized to construct the weapon? He provided coordinates to a secure data repository on his flagship. Fully aware of its obliteration, he intended to gauge their commitment. The interrogation stretched for hours, a relentless probing of his intellect and his conscience. Sharma and Chun were unyielding, their questions focused and relentless. He discovered a grudging respect for their tenacity, their refusal to surrender hope, even when faced with insurmountable odds. Later, the interrogation concluded. Zorgan was escorted from his cell. Instead of a return to his confinement, he was led through a warren of corridors. Passing teeming laboratories and workshops, he observed men and women, their visages smudged with grime and their eyes aflame with intensity, toiling tirelessly on intricate devices. He heard the sizzle of welders, the drone of generators, the clatter of tools. He recognized some of the technology. Xylar armaments salvaged from downed craft. However, rather than being employed for devastation, they were being disassembled, scrutinized, repurposed. He saw human scientists poring over Xylar schematics, their faces illuminated with understanding. He was conveyed to a large observation window overlooking a vast subterranean complex. Within, multitudes labored on some immense undertaking. He observed engineers calibrating energy weapons, mechanics welding armor plating, and technicians testing communication arrays. "What is this?" he inquired of the guard. "Our future," the guard responded, his voice devoid of any inflection. "We're constructing a defense system that we're assimilating your technology, and we will use it against you." Zorgan experienced a prickle of something alien, a feeling of disquiet. He had consistently regarded humans as backward, feeble, and easily subdued. But what he was witnessing now was entirely different. He was witnessing resilience, innovation, and an unyielding determination to endure. He was then escorted to a chamber with a sprawling panoramic screen. The screen flickered to life, displaying images of profound ruin. He saw cities reduced to skeletal remains, forests transformed into ash, oceans choked with debris. He saw the faces of the deceased, their eyes staring blankly into the infinite. His own orders flashed on the screen, broadcast on every news channel on Earth. He had never witnessed the ramifications of his actions on this scale. The images were accompanied by a commentary, a measured, somber tone that spoke of loss and agony. That he heard narratives of families rent asunder, of lives extinguished, of aspirations obliterated. He saw the faces of the survivors, their features gaunt with sorrow, yet their eyes still harboring a spark of defiance. He had witnessed the obliteration caused by his actions. He had heard the accounts of the victims, and he had begun to fathom the true cost of conquest. It was not merely about land and materials. That it was about lives, about destinies, about the very soul of a world. As he stood there, observing the scenes of carnage, Zorgan experienced a pang of something he had not felt in eons. Contrition. He had been so engrossed in the glory of the Imperium, in the intoxication of conquest, that he had disregarded the human toll. He had become a monster, a decimator of worlds. The guard directed him back to his cell, the images of ruin branded into his mind. He sat on the cot, the chill of the cell now feeling like a heavy stone within his chest. He closed his eyes, attempting to quell the memories, but they were unrelenting, assailing him with their clarity. He reflected upon his own world, upon the sterile, contrived environment he had matured in. He considered the inflexible societal structure, the ceaseless propaganda, the unrelenting pressure to conform. He had always maintained that the Imperium was the zenith of civilization, that its way of life was the only way. Yet now, as he sat in this prison cell, encompassed by the evidence of his own barbarity, he began to question everything he had ever embraced. He began to ponder whether the Imperium was truly as noble as he had always believed, or whether it was merely a ruthless, soulless machine, crushing everything in its path. He considered the humans he had encountered, Sharma, Chun, the scientists and engineers he had observed in the laboratories. They were flawed, imperfect, yet they possessed something that the Imperium lacked, a sense of aspiration, a sense of empathy, a sense of humanity. He began to contemplate if there was another path, a path to construct a future grounded in collaboration and understanding, instead of conquest and domination. He knew it would be a protracted and arduous journey, but he could not shake the sensation that it was the only journey worth undertaking. As the days bled into weeks, Zorgan remained in his cell, a prisoner of war and a prisoner of his own introspection. He continued to be interrogated, but his responses were no longer motivated by a compulsion to safeguard the Imperium. He began to perceive that humanity was not a pestilence to be extirpated, but a complex, adaptable species deserving of survival. He saw the resilience of the human spirit, their capacity to rebuild from the embers, their unwavering resolve to struggle for their destiny. He saw their ingenuity, their aptitude to adjust and innovate, their willingness to glean knowledge from their adversaries. He began to comprehend that the Imperium's ideology of conquest and subjugation was not only ethically bankrupt, but also strategically flawed. That it engendered enemies, fueled resistance, and ultimately precipitated its own demise. He wondered if it was too late for him to alter, to compensate for his past transgressions. He knew he could never undo the devastation he had inflicted, but perhaps he could employ his knowledge and his sway to assist in constructing a superior future, a future where humans and Xylar could coexist in harmony. That he knew it would be a long shot, a desperate gamble. Yet as he sat in his prison cell, gazing at the cold, unyielding walls, he realized that he had nothing left to forfeit. He had betrayed his own people. He would strive for his absolution, the cure, Eris Thorne found solace in the lab's muted mechanical drone. Overhead, fluorescent tubes cast a wan, spectral light across rows of instruments, vials and beakers arranged with surgical precision. Sleep had become a luxury, sacrificed to a caffeine-fueled imperative. To dismantle the Xyler's biological horror, pure retaliation thrummed in his veins. He wasn't a soldier like Lyra. His war raged in the infinitesimal, and he meant to claim victory. He scrutinized the monitor, the digital cascade of genetic sequences coalescing into a discernible structure. The weapon, amplified by Earth's environment, had mutated into something monstrous. Yet, buried within that complexity, Thorne discovered a linchpin, a critical weakness. "It's stabilizing," he breathed, more to himself than the anxious technicians, Maya and Ben, behind him. "The antigen, it's enduring." Maya and Ben exchanged tired looks, having witnessed Thorne's obsessive plunge, his brush with the precipice of sanity. They hesitated to embrace premature optimism. "Are you certain, Doctor?" Maya ventured. "We've encountered misleading results previously." Thorne pivoted, his gaze, normally veiled by thick lenses and social reticence, now laser-sharp. "This is different. The cellular response, it's disrupting the pathogen's reproductive cycle completely. A true antidote." Exhaustion threatened to engulf him. Yet underneath, a nascent triumph took root. He had achieved it. He had turned the Xyler's weapon against them. News of Thorne's breakthrough electrified the makeshift headquarters. President Sharma, her face a canvas of hope mingled with wary appraisal, appeared at the lab within the hour, accompanied by Dr. Chun and a phalanx of security. "Dr. Thorne," Sharma greeted, extending a hand. "I understand you have promising developments." Thorne, ever ill at ease with such encounters, adjusted his glasses nervously. "Yes, Madam President, that I've formulated a cure for the Xyler pathogen. The in vitro analyses have been conclusive." Sharma's gaze sharpened. "Human trials?" "Not yet," he conceded. "But the antigen targets specific Xyler genetic signatures. The hazard to humans is minimal. A calculated risk, but the potential reward eclipsed the dangers." Chun advanced, his expression pensive. "The implications are considerable. Doctor, if we eradicate the Xyler's affliction, we might extend the remedy to their remaining soldiers. An act of reconciliation." The notion hung heavy in the air, laden with unspoken complications. Reconciliation? After the devastation wrought by the Xyler, Thorne, consumed by his thirst for retribution, hadn't entertained such a prospect. "Why?" he questioned, his voice a mere thread. "Why assist them?" Sharma met his gaze, her resolve firm. "Because, Dr. Thorne, we are not them. That we do not subjugate and annihilate. That we persevere. That we rebuild. And sometimes, we proffer a hand to those who have wronged us, hoping they might choose a different course." The die was cast. The cure would be produced on a large scale, and a medical team dispatched to the Xyler prisoner of war enclaves. Lyra, despite her initial misgivings, volunteered to spearhead the mission, understanding the nuanced nature of the situation implicitly. She had witnessed the war's ferocity, but also glimmers of unexpected humanity. Against all odds, she fostered belief in redemption's possibility. The Xyler prisoner of war camps were grim testaments to despair. Barbed wire encircled rows of prefabricated structures, the atmosphere thick with the acrid tang of disinfectant and hopelessness. The Xyler soldiers, disarmed and stripped of their power, were mere specters of their former selves. Their once proud visages were haggard, their eyes hollowed by defeat and illness. Lyra addressed them, her countenance composed but steely. She raised a vial of the cure, the pale liquid catching the stark light. "We have developed a cure for the contagion," she announced, her voice resonating through a portable amplifier. "We offer it to you, without cost." A murmur rippled across the assembled ranks. Some regarded her with suspicion, others with disbelief. Yet, in a select few, hope flickered. One by one, the medical team, garbed in protective suits, began administering the cure. Some Xyler soldiers accepted it readily, their faces a complex mixture of relief and humiliation. Others refused, clinging to their imperial dogma, their antipathy for humanity undiminished. "We will not accept your pity," one Xyler soldier snarled, spitting onto the dusty ground. "We would sooner perish than be indebted to your inferior breed." Lyra met his gaze, her expression unwavering. "This is not an act of pity," she countered. "It is about alleviating suffering. It is about choosing a different trajectory." The soldier remained defiant, his eyes burning with hatred. Lyra sighed, moving to the next Xyler soldier in line. She knew she couldn't reach everyone, but she had to persevere. For each life salvaged, for each heart softened, there was a glimmer of a better tomorrow. Among those who accepted the cure was Zorgan. He stood slightly apart, his imposing stature still conveying authority. Despite his captivity, he watched Lyra with mingled curiosity and respect. He didn't completely comprehend her motives, but he sensed genuine compassion, a willingness to set aside retribution. When his turn arrived, he extended his arm without hesitation. Lyra administered the injection, her hand steady. Their eyes locked, and for a fleeting moment, Zorgan glimpsed a reflection of his own lost humanity within her gaze. That he witnessed her pain, her losses, but also the enduring hope that defined the human spirit. "Why?" he rasped, his voice rough with disuse. "Why do you do this?" Lyra offered a sad smile. "Because we believe in the potential for transformation, Admiral Zorgan, even for you." As the cure permeated the Xyler ranks, Thorn remained sequestered in his lab, poring over the data that he tracked: the pathogen's decline, the cellular restoration, the measured return to health. He interpreted the numbers as sterile data points, but he knew that each represented a life retrieved, a potential future salvaged. He also scrutinized the data from the human trials. The antigen was harmless, efficacious. The cure functioned as intended. That he had accomplished his objective. That he had retaliated against the Xyler, not through destruction, but through restoration. Yet, as he stared at the data, his victory felt unfulfilling. The exhilaration he had anticipated was supplanted by a disquieting unease. That he had engineered a cure, but he hadn't addressed the core issue. The Xyler Imperium remained a looming threat. The animosity and mistrust that fueled the conflict persisted, simmering beneath the surface. His gaze drifted to the image of Lyra, projected on a nearby screen, administering the cure. To a Xyler soldier, he noted the empathy in her eyes, her unwavering faith in the prospect of rehabilitation. He realized that she was engaged in a different kind of battle, a campaign for hearts and minds. He realized, with growing conviction, that it was a fight that humanity needed to win. He departed the lab, emerging into the bustling heart of headquarters. The atmosphere buzzed with frenetic activity. The steady thrum of generators, the murmur of voices. That he felt adrift, disoriented, uncertain of his next move. That he saw President Sharma approaching, her face etched with exhaustion but radiating resolve. "Dr. Thorne," she said softly, "I wish to express my gratitude. You have granted us an opportunity, a flicker of hope." Thorne regarded her, his eyes clouded with doubt. "What now, Madam President?" he asked. "What do we do with this opportunity?" Sharma smiled, a weary but optimistic smile. "We forge a future, Dr. Thorne. A future where compassion triumphs over animosity, where understanding eclipses fear. A future where we can coexist in peace." Thorne surveyed the faces of the individuals laboring tirelessly, rebuilding their civilization, mending their wounds. He saw the tenacity, the inventiveness, the unwavering spirit that defined humanity. For the first time, he felt a surge of hope, a nascent belief that they might create a better future, not just for themselves, but for all, even the Xyler, the defector. The prison block's recycled air hung heavy, thick with a tension that tightened like a vice. Lyra steadied the neural interface, its chill a stark contrast to the slick heat of her palm. The Xyler prisoners watched her, their expressions a blend of suspicion and a fragile hope. The initial doses of the cure had yielded promising results. The telltale violet rash, signature of the engineered plague, was fading, leaving behind only faintly scarred skin. "Xyler," Lyra announced, her voice broadcast throughout the prison. "I am Lyra of House Vaude. For generations, my bloodline served the Imperium, believing in its might, its iron rule, its self-proclaimed destiny. Today, I declare that belief a fabrication." A wave of murmurs rippled through the assembled prisoners. Jax, the warden, a brutish mountain of a man with eyes like polished jet, lunged forward, bellowing, "Traitor, silence her at once." Guards moved to obey, weapons rising, only to be met by a wall of Xyler soldiers, clad in the same dull gray armor, now leveled against their former allies. These were the seeds she had sown, those who had begun to question the endless cycle of conquest, the wanton squandering of lives. I have peered behind the curtain, Lyra continued, her voice ringing with conviction. The Imperium doesn't forge order. It breeds annihilation. It boasts strength, but its power is a fragile construct built upon the graveyards of subjugated worlds. And Earth has exposed the creeping decay at the heart of our vaunted Imperium. She gestured towards the prisoners, their faces mirrors of exhaustion and bewilderment. This plague, it was meant to shatter Earth. Instead, it fractured us. It revealed our hubris, our flaws. But humanity, on the brink of collapse, extended a hand. They offered a cure, a chance at restitution. The Imperium would have left us to rot. Jack spat a glob of contempt on the floor. Lies. Humanity is weak. They'll use this fabricated mercy to shackle us all. Shackled, Lyra countered, a dismissive scoff in her tone. Jax, open your eyes. We already wear chains. Chains forged by a system that demands constant war, stifles dissent, values dominion above all else. That I choose liberation. I choose a future where we are defined not by the worlds we've annihilated, but by those we nurture. She inhaled deeply. I, Lyra of House Vaude, sever my fealty to the Xyler Imperium. That I stand with humanity, with those who seek a brighter horizon. A cheer rose from segments of the assembled prisoners, a fragile, nascent sound that nonetheless vibrated with hope. The soldiers loyal to Lyra solidified their stance. Weapons raised higher, an impasse hung in the air. Jax, momentarily taken aback, quickly regained his composure. Protocol Omega, he snarled into his calm, his gaze burning with venom. Initiate Protocol Omega in Prison Block Zeta. Exterminate everything. Eliminate the traitors and the humans who enable them. Lyra knew the implications. Block Zeta housed the most unruly inmates, deemed irredeemable. Protocol Omega was a death sentence, a scorched earth directive intended to extinguish any spark of rebellion. We have to move, now, Lyra urged her followers, her voice taut. They're initiating a purge that we need to secure a transport and escape. Bedlam erupted, sirens wailed, red lights pulsed, and the prison descended into a vortex of chaos. Lyra and her soldiers battled through the corridors, their superior training and strategic advantage granting them a narrow edge. They reached the transport bay, only to find it barricaded by a heavily armed contingent of Jax's soldiers. The ensuing clash was a brutal ballet of desperation. Lyra fought with fierce resolve, her energy pistol spitting arcs of white-hot plasma. She saw Vela, a young woman, who had pledged herself to Lyra's cause, crumple to the ground, a smoking wound blossoming on her chest. Her rage ignited anew. Finally, they seized a compact transport shuttle. Lyra piloted it out of the prison complex, evading laser fire and maneuvering through the pandemonium of the skies above. As they pierced the atmosphere, she glanced back at the prison, now a dim constellation of lights etched against the blighted landscape. Where to? A gravelly voice asked from beside her. Kale, a seasoned veteran who had been pivotal in swaying others, stood ready. Earth, Lyra stated, her voice resolute. We possess information that can turn the tide of this conflict. The transport touched down on a makeshift landing strip carved from the ruins of what had once been a thriving metropolis. Lyra emerged, the earth air, thick with the tang of smoke and decay, filling her lungs. She was met by a squad of human soldiers, their expressions guarded but determined. President Sharma stepped forward, her gaze unwavering and assessing. Lyra of House Vaude? Yes, Lyra replied, her voice clear and strong. I am here to pledge my allegiance and provide intelligence regarding the Xyler Imperium. The data Lyra and her defectors divulged proved invaluable. They exposed vulnerabilities in Xyler military strategy, weaknesses in their technological defenses, and the internal power struggles that threatened to unravel the Imperium. They offered schematics of Xyler warships, details of communication networks, and locations of key strategic assets. That a critical revelation concerned the Xyler's resource pipeline. Lyra explained that their energy weapons, the very weapons that had decimated Earth's cities were dependent on a rare mineral found only on a handful of subjugated planets. Severing that supply chain could cripple their war efforts. General Williams, the battle-hardened commander of Earth's remaining military forces, listened intently, his eyes shimmering with a newfound glint of hope. This could shift the balance, he declared. Lyra understood that her defection had demanded an immense sacrifice. She had forsaken her people, renounced her past, and gambled everything on a future she could not ensure. Yet, she maintained faith in her choices. She believed that humanity, with its indomitable spirit and empathy, offered a superior path than the relentless cycle of conquest and decimation that characterized the Xylar Imperium. Back on the Xylar flagship, the ironclad, Jack stood before the Imperator's holographic projection, his face a study in fury and humiliation. Lyra of House Vaude has defected, Imperator, Jax reported, his voice strained with barely contained rage. She has absconded with a contingent of soldiers and critical intelligence. The Imperator's image wavered slightly. Lyra, a disappointment. She was always prone to idealism. However, this constitutes treason, unpardonable. She will answer for her crimes, Imperator. Jack swore, his fist clenching until his knuckles shone white. I will hunt her relentlessly. She will suffer for her betrayal. Ensure that you do, the Imperator commanded, his voice glacial and devoid of emotion. Her treachery cannot be tolerated. That IT sends a message of weakness to the other conquered worlds. Failure is unacceptable, Commander. The transmission terminated. Jax remained alone on the bridge, his anger smoldering like a banked fire. He felt betrayed, not just by Lyra, but by the Imperium itself. He had dedicated his existence to its glory, and now his devotion was questioned because of the defiance of one woman. He would exact retribution. He would crush the rebellion on Earth, track down Lyra, and prove his unwavering allegiance to the Imperium. He would unleash the full, destructive power of the Xylar war machine upon humanity, and he would ensure that Lyra witnessed the carnage firsthand before he delivered her, broken and humbled, to the Imperator. His purpose was clear: scour this planet of life, and return with the head of the traitor. He slammed his fist on the console, the metal protesting under the force. Prepare for immediate departure to Earth, he roared. We have a fugitive to capture. Rebuilding. In the skeletal remains of the United Nations General Assembly Hall, dust motes pirouette in a solitary sunbeam. This hollowed space, once a stage for global discourse, now served as the temporary base for the fledgling Global Council. Ghostly holographic flags of defunct nations flickered, digital relics awaiting replacement by a symbol of unity. Jian Li, grime painting his face and exhaustion carving deep lines around his eyes, regarded the inert Xylar energy weapon. Its polished, dark surface mirrored his fatigue. His rough hand traced the weapon's cool curve. Elegant in its dread, he murmured. Elegant and brutally effective. A voice rasped from the gloom. Dr. Eris Thorne materialized, his pallid face illuminated by a shard of sunlight piercing the shattered dome. His eyes burned with zealous fire. We underestimated their ingenuity, Lee. Never again will we make that mistake. Lee sighed. Thorne's manic energy was a constant in the rebuilt bunker. The man had become one with Xylar tech, obsessed with understanding, exceeding, and countering it. We're gaining ground, Eris. The energy lattice, it's labyrinthine, but we're mapping it. The shielding, the propulsion, all attainable. Thorne nodded, gaze locked on the deactivated weapon. Attainable isn't victory we must surpass. We must weaponize their strengths against them. Weaponizing is one thing, Lee countered, wiping his hands on a tattered rag. Grasping the full repercussions is another. Remember Chimera? A repeat is unthinkable. Thorne winced, a shadow of anguish fleeting across his face. The bioweapon, intended to hobble the Xylar advance, had mutated hideously, leaving a trail of suffering on both sides. It was a visceral reminder of the perilous tightrope walk between salvation and annihilation. We proceed with caution this time, he whispered, his voice hoarse. We have no other choice. Lee let the matter rest, the guilt evident in Thorne's demeanor. He changed tack. Council convenes in an hour. They're demanding a progress update. and a date for mass production of something, anything. Thorn grimaced. Politics, a bitter necessity. Tell them we're close, that we're nearing a breakthrough. But no promises of miracles. Such promises have a nasty habit of turning to ash. Down the hall, in an office pieced together from reclaimed furniture and salvaged power cells, Director Anya Petrova, de facto leader of the Global Council, scrutinized a projected world map. The Xylar invasion had left indelible wounds, cauterized landscapes, pulverized metropolises, orbital bombardment scars. It's devastating, she breathed, raking a hand through her close-cropped hair. Weariness tugged at her features, but her resolve held firm. Devastating, yet not insurmountable. General, Marcus Cole asserted, his voice a gravelly promise. The former Marine, now commander of the Unified Earth Defense Force, stood beside her, ramrod straight despite the exhaustion etched into his face. We've weathered worse storms, endured greater losses. And yet, we endure. Petrova nodded, taking strength from his steadfast optimism. The council is fragmenting. Old nationalistic fissures are reappearing. Some factions clamor solely for reinforced defenses, others demand immediate, unrestrained retaliation. Cole frowned. Revenge is a luxury we can't afford. Not yet. Our priorities lie in solidifying defenses, rebuilding infrastructure, and understanding the enemy. And all that demands unity. Petrova said, her tone sharpening. Which makes this session critical. We must demonstrate that a unified world order is the sole path forward, that the old world is deceased, and a new world forged from ash is our only hope. And should they refuse that hope? Cole inquired, his hand instinctively ghosting toward the absent sidearm. Petrova sighed. Then we remind them of the precipice of the millions lost due to petty squabbles instead of unified resistance. The council meeting was a maelstrom of voices, a churning vortex of accusations, demands, and self-justifications. The holographic flags, still erratic in their display, seemed to mock the tenuous alliance they symbolized. Representatives from what had been formidable nations bickered over resources, turf, and dominance. Our defenses must be prioritized, the European Union representative bellowed, his voice reverberating through the hall. We cannot squander resources on global rebuilding efforts. And what of us? Countered the African Union representative, his voice edged with raw indignation. We suffered the brunt of the assault. Our foundations are in ruins, our people starve. Are we to be cast aside to wither? Petrova watched the disintegration unfold, her heart plummeting. Perhaps she'd been naive to believe the shared trauma would foster lasting solidarity. Old patterns were proving to be a deep-seated malady. Cole leaned in, his voice a low rumble. It's unraveling. They're succumbing to old habits. Petrova inhaled deeply, bracing herself that it was time to gamble. She activated the holographic projector, casting grisly images, the ossified husks of cities, mass graves, the faces of the fallen. Behold, she commanded, her voice resonating through the chamber. Behold what we have sacrificed. Behold what we have become. We teetered on the brink of oblivion because we were too engrossed in internal strife to recognize the enemy at our doors. Silence descended, the representatives transfixed by the harrowing display, their faces mirroring a blend of horror and contrition. We can continue this trajectory. Petrova continued, her voice softening. We can rebuild individual empires, cling to obsolete identities, and await the Xylar's return to finish their task, or we can heed the lessons of the past. We can unite. We can consolidate our strengths, pool our knowledge, and forge a new civilization. A civilization where solidarity is the bedrock and no soul is abandoned. A civilization united against any transgression. She paused, allowing her words to permeate the silence. The verdict rests with you. I entreat you to decide judiciously, for the fate of humankind hangs in the balance. The silence stretched, taut and weighty. Then, haltingly, individually, the representatives began to nod. The European Union representative was the first, followed by the African Union representative. Then others, until the chamber resonated with a chorus of concurrence. A unified global governance was conceived, forged in the crucible of devastation and loss. Fragile, scarred with imperfections and ancient prejudices, it was nonetheless a beginning that a base from which humanity could rebuild. Meanwhile, in the depths of a clandestine subterranean lab, Thorne labored over a complex cluster of Xylar apparatus. Cables snaked across the floor, bridging alien components to human-engineered systems. The air thrummed with energy. A constant mechanical drone filled the chamber. Eli watched him, his gaze a mixture of admiration and apprehension. "You haven't slept in 2 days, Eris. You need rest." Thorne barely registered his presence. "I'm close, Lee. I can sense it. I am nearing the source of their power." "And then?" Lee asked, "What is your design?" Thorne looked up, his eyes blazing with an almost divine zeal. "I will empower humanity to reclaim its future. Empower them to carry the fight to the Xylar themselves." "But at what cost?" Lee pressed. "Remember Chimera. Remember the consequences of tampering with forces we barely comprehend." "This is different," Thorne insisted. "This isn't a bioweapon. This is raw energy. Harnessed, channeled, weaponized energy." "And you are sure it can be controlled?" Thorne hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. "It must be." News of Thorne's strides spread like a brushfire. He became an emblem of hope, a beacon of scientific prowess in a world cloaked in shadow. The Global Council lavished him with recognition, resources, and unreserved support. Thorne, however, remained isolated, impervious to the acclaim. His sole focus was his research, his fixation on mastering and eclipsing the Xylar point. One evening, Petrova sought Thorne in his sanctuary. She found him immersed in machinery, his face gaunt and pale, his eyes bloodshot. "Dr. Thorne," she began softly, "I came to express my gratitude for all you're doing for humanity." Thorne gave her a cursory glance. "I am not doing it for humanity," he said tonelessly. "I am doing it for myself to prove that we are not inferior, that we can exceed them." Petrova frowned. "That is not a healthy outlook. Doctor, this is not about reprisal. It's about survival." "Survival is insufficient," Thorne retorted. "We must flourish, that we must conquer, we must demonstrate our worth to the cosmos." Petrova sighed. She empathized with Thorne's indignation, his craving for retribution, yet she was wary of the precipice he was approaching. "Be cautious, Doctor," she cautioned. "Do not allow your hunger for vengeance to consume you. Do not become the very evil you seek to eradicate." Thorne offered no response. He simply turned back to his work, his fingers dancing across the keyboard, his mind lost in the intricate equations and alien technology that claimed his every moment. As Petrova departed the lab, she couldn't shake the sense that Thorne was toying with fire, and she dreaded the burn that was to come. The reconstruction process was protracted, arduous, and riddled with obstacles. Yet humanity persevered. They scavenged, they innovated, they adapted, they harnessed recovered Xylar tech to construct new habitations, to generate pristine energy, to pioneer advanced medical treatments. They gleaned insights from their missteps and emerged from the ashes more robust, more adaptable, and more collaborative than before. The Global Council, despite its internal squabbles and political machinations, succeeded in establishing a functional governance, a structure for cooperation and progress. Their priorities were infrastructure revitalization, humanitarian aid, distribution, and coordination of the Earth Defense Force. And Thorne, driven by his fixation, persisted in his work in the shadows, extending the boundaries of science and innovation, resolute in granting humanity the means not only to endure, but to dominate. The future remained precarious, the menace of the Xylars still looming. Yet humanity had discovered a renewed sense of purpose, a rekindled resolution to struggle for its survival, and a glimmer of optimism in the shadows. The reconstruction had commenced, and the battle was far from over. A change of heart. Zorgan's confinement had transcended mere imprisonment, though the reinforced plasteel shell persisted, a stark reminder of his captivity. The space within had become a crucible of transformation, not a physical one. Xylar physiology proved stubbornly immutable, but a profound internal shift, a subterranean quake altering his very core. That he sat, legs intertwined, the datapad casting a soft luminescence on his features. That a passage from Sun Tzu's The Art of War, rendered in his native Xylar script, occupied the screen. He'd become a voracious consumer of Earth's treasury of history, art, and philosophy. endeavoring to comprehend the species that had so unexpectedly challenged the Imperium's dominion. Military strategy had been his initial focus, seeking the key to their resistance. But an emergent curiosity had soon drawn him into broader intellectual avenues that a clawed digit traced the alien glyphs. His brow creased in thought. He'd once dismissed humanity as a primitive inconvenience, a minor hurdle to galactic ascendance. Now he perceived them as a multifaceted species, capable of both breathtaking barbarity and profound empathy. The Earthlings had granted him access to their vast digital repositories, a gesture initially perceived as manipulative. Yet, as he navigated this digital ocean, he began to suspect more complex motivations. They sought understanding, a recognition beyond their value as mere resources. He immersed himself in their religions, dissected their political frameworks, and absorbed their artistic expressions. He listened to their melodies, read their narratives, and viewed their cinematic creations. He learned of their apexes and nadirs, their aspirations and anxieties. The concept of democracy particularly captivated him, a seemingly chaotic and inefficient governance model when compared to the Imperium's rigid hierarchy, yet one possessing a tenacious endurance that had spanned centuries. The notion that power should emanate from the collective, rather than a privileged elite, was a revolutionary, almost sacrilegious, revelation. Weeks were devoted to dissecting the pandemic, scrutinizing scientific findings and medical papers. He grasped the principles underlying the bioweapon, the sinister elegance of its design, and the calamitous repercussions of its deployment. He recognized the arrogance inherent in the Xylers' presumption of control, the hubris that had precipitated their downfall. Words began to flow. Initially, mere jottings, fleeting thoughts captured on the datapad, but gradually, these fragments coalesced into a more cohesive whole, a manifesto articulating his vision for an alternate future, one where Xyler and humanity could coexist harmoniously. He posited that the Imperium's relentless expansion had blinded them to the worth of other civilizations, that their obsession with conquest had steered them onto a path of self-annihilation. He proposed a paradigm shift in interstellar relations, founded on mutual respect and collaboration, eschewing domination and exploitation. He advocated for a cessation of hostilities, a negotiated resolution that would safeguard the continued existence of both species. He acknowledged the atrocities perpetrated by the Imperium, but contended that perpetuating conflict would only yield further anguish and devastation. The manifesto represented a stark deviation from Xyler dogma, a renunciation of his formerly held convictions. He was acutely aware that its dissemination within the Imperium would be met with scorn and condemnation, branding him a traitor and an apostate. Yet, he could no longer disregard the truth that had crystallized before him. He had witnessed the ruin wrought by the war, the suffering inflicted upon all involved. He had been an observer to the resilience of the human spirit, their unwavering resolve to survive against overwhelming odds. That he had arrived at the conviction that a superior path existed, one devoid of perpetual conflict and demolition. He felt compelled to act, to leverage his position, however constrained, to foster understanding and reconciliation. That he submitted the finished manifesto to his human keepers, fully expecting its dismissal as the disquisitions of a deranged captive. To his astonishment, they treated it with gravity. They translated it into numerous languages and circulated it amongst their leaders and experts. Weeks later, President Anya Sharma, her face lined with fatigue, yet her eyes retaining a spark of resolve, visited him in his cell. "Admiral Zorgan," she began, her tone deliberate. "I have studied your manifesto." Zorgan ascended, his spines prickling with trepidation. "And it's unexpected," she conceded. "Frankly, after the Xyler's past deeds, it's a struggle to fathom one of you championing peace." "I comprehend your skepticism," Zorgan responded. "I expect no immediate trust, but I assure you, my expressions are genuine." Sharma scrutinized him intently, her gaze unwavering. Why this transformation?" Zorgan hesitated, seeking the correct phrasing. "I have reflected, studied your culture, your history. That I have witnessed the effects of our actions, the devastation we have caused. That I surmise that the Imperium is poised on a descent towards self-obliteration. We cannot persist in conquering and exploiting without ultimately confronting the repercussions. And you trust that humanity could be an ally in crafting a superior future? I trust we must endeavor, Zorgan declared. The alternative is untenable. Sharma inclined her head slowly. Your expressions are persuasive, but trust is a commodity earned, Admiral, not freely bestowed. I comprehend. I have elected to assume a calculated risk, she went on. I intend to liberate you. Zorgan was caught off guard. Liberate me? Return me to the Imperium? Precisely, Sharma affirmed. I intend to dispatch you back to your kind, accompanied by your manifesto that I desire you to present your argument before the High Council, to endeavor to convince them that a more enlightened path exists. You wager significantly, Zorgan stated, his tone inflected with bewilderment. I could readily revert to the Imperium and reassume my command that I could harness the knowledge I have gained to bolster their war effort. I am cognizant of that, Sharma replied. Yet, I must retain faith that the potential for peace endures, that I must believe that within the heart of the Imperium, there are those amenable to reason. Why? Zorgan reiterated. Why place such trust in me? Sharma emitted a sigh, massaging her temples. Because, frankly, Admiral, our viable options are dwindling. The war has exacted a gruesome toll on humanity. We require respite to rebuild and recover. Should your manifesto even sow a seed of uncertainty within the Xylar leadership's collective consciousness, the risk shall have been justified. She paused, her eyes hardening. But let there be no ambiguity, Admiral. Should you betray us, should you exploit this opportunity to inflict harm upon humanity, I shall pursue you relentlessly. You shall rue the day of your birth. Zorgan met her gaze, his expression inscrutable. I comprehend. You shall not regret this decision, President Sharma. The arrangements proceeded with dispatch that a revamped Xylar transport, seized during a prior skirmish, was readied for the voyage. Zorgan was provisioned with a secure communications channel to the Imperium, as well as a comprehensive summary of the current state of the war. Standing on the launch pad, poised to embark the transport, he pivoted to face Sharma one final time. Thank you, he expressed, his tone unexpectedly gentle. Sharma offered a curt nod. Reserve your gratitude, Admiral. The true tribulations lie ahead. The transport ascended, its engines emitting a thunderous roar as it pierced the heavens. Zorgan observed as Earth diminished below, a swirling azure and verdant sphere amidst the cosmic void. He was acutely aware that he was embarking upon a treacherous mission. He was returning to a society that would likely perceive him as a subversive, a heretic. He was bearing a message that would challenge the very bedrock of the Imperium. But he also carried a scintilla of hope, a conviction that concord was achievable, that the Xylar and humanity could coexist. He had glimpsed the potential for virtue within both races, the capacity for compassion and empathy. He was compelled to act. He was driven to exert every faculty to avert further bloodshed, to forge a brighter destiny for both the Xylar and humanity. As the transport surged toward the stars, Zorgan activated the communications channel and readied himself to address the High Council of the Xylar Imperium. His voice, amplified by the ship's comm system, sliced through the vacuum, carrying a declaration of both hope and defiance to the epicenter of the enemy. This is Admiral Zorgan, he declared. I have returned with a message that shall usher in an epoch of change. The seeds of rebellion. The void fractured, regurgitating Zorgan's transport into Xylar Prime's suffocating embrace. He registered the planet's gravity, a psychic weight of culpability intertwined with a fragile bud of hope. The landing bay stood chillingly vacant, save for a cadre of armored guards, their expressions concealed behind reflective masks. No celebration, no welcoming delegation. Just the cold glint of weaponry that he was escorted, rather than greeted, through the Citadel's aseptic arteries, that edifice of Xylar. Dominance, the low thrum of power lines, the stale, metallic reek of recycled air, the sheer, brutal efficiency of the architecture. It all felt jarring, corrupted by the values he'd assimilated during his imprisonment. He recalled the unconfined expanse of the human sky, the perfume of genuine flora, Lyra's authentic solicitude. Here, artifice reigned, control suffocated, and warmth was absent. He was directed to the grand concourse, an amphitheater for pronouncements. only Counselor Valerius, occupied the space beneath the gargantuan hologram emitter. The counselor's features, a roadmap of ambition and guile, were as smooth and impenetrable as the citadel's ramparts. Zorgan, Valerius' voice resonated, a gravelly baritone that filled the immense chamber. We presumed you lost at a casualty of the disastrous Earth incursion. I live, Zorgan responded, his voice imbued with newfound certitude. And I have returned to impart what I have learned. Valerius emitted a dry, mirthless chuckle. Learned? From humans? What lessons could those primitives possibly offer a Xylar admiral? They revealed the preciousness of life, Zorgan declared, his gaze unwavering. They demonstrated the pointlessness of perpetual conquest. They revealed that strength inheres not in supremacy, but in comprehension. Valerius' eyes narrowed to slits. Words of treason. You are tainted, admiral, indoctrinated by the enemy. I have been liberated from ignorance, Zorgan retorted. The war against Earth is a calamity. The bioweapon.it ravaged their population, true, but it has also unleashed a pestilence upon our own worlds. Our resources are dwindling. Our legions weakened. We are draining ourselves dry for a world that offers only resistance. Valerius closed the distance between them, his voice a sibilant whisper. Earth is a keystone, Zorgan. A means to a grander design. Dominion over that world will ensure our control of this entire galactic sector. At what price in lives and wealth? Zorgan countered, his voice ringing with urgency. How many more Xylar must perish? How many more worlds must be laid to waste? We are becoming the very scourge we claim to oppose, a plague upon the galaxy. Valerius turned his back. The High Council will determine your fate, Admiral. Until then, you are confined. I hold no fear of confinement, Zorgan stated. Truth defies containment. He was taken to a holding cell, more cramped and austere than his quarters on Earth, yet he discovered an unexpected sense of peace. He had delivered his truth. The seed was sown. Now, its growth lay in the hands of others. News of Zorgan's return and his seditious declarations raced through the Xylar data streams. Some branded him a traitor, a puppet of the enemy. Others, weary of unending war and escalating scarcities, listened with a glimmer of anticipation. Valerius, sensing a change in the undercurrents, responded swiftly that he orchestrated a meticulously crafted broadcast, portraying Zorgan as a craven collaborator who bartered his life for the enemy's favored. He presented manipulated recordings, distorted passages from Zorgan's manifesto, and fabricated evidence of his alleged treachery. The broadcast culminated in a call to arms, a demand for absolute loyalty to the Imperium, and a pledge to extinguish the human rebellion forever. But Valerius's propaganda, despite its skillful construction, felt hollow. The people were exhausted. Too many comrades had returned in funeral shrouds. Too many resources had been funneled into the war effort. They had tasted the acrid spoils of conquest and found them wanting. Deep within the Citadel's underbelly, a technician named Vela listened to Valerius' broadcast with growing revulsion. Her brother had perished on Earth, a casualty of human resistance. Initially, she had championed the war, viewing it as vital to the Xylar's survival. But the relentless falsehoods, the ceaseless propaganda, the flagrant corruption of the ruling class, these had eroded her convictions. She had secretly accessed Zorgan's unedited manifesto, smuggled out by a sympathetic guard. His words struck a chord within her, offering a way out of the endless cycle of brutality. Vela commenced sharing Zorgan's message with her colleagues, whispering in the shadows, planting the seeds of dissent in the fertile soil of disaffection. Gradually, cautiously, others joined her: mechanics, engineers, data analysts, the cogs within the Imperium's machinery, the personnel who kept the war machine functioning. They possessed the capability to disrupt, to sabotage, to bring the entire edifice to a standstill. On Xylar Secundus, a mining colony bled dry by resource exhaustion, a conclave of laborers convened in secrecy to analyze Zorgan's manifesto. They were the forgotten of the Imperium, those who toiled in the pits, extracting the raw materials that fueled the war effort. They had witnessed their families starve, their children succumb to preventable diseases, while the elite gorged themselves on the rewards of conquest. The former legionnaire named Jax presided over the debate. He had fought on numerous subjugated worlds, witnessing the Xylar's barbarity firsthand. He had returned home embittered, his faith in the Imperium shattered as Zorgan's words offered a spark of promise, a chance to forge a better existence for his people. Jax and his followers began to organize, forming cells of resistance within the mines. They plotted to disrupt production, to cripple equipment, to staunch the flow of resources to the war effort. They understood the risks were daunting, yet they embraced the cost of freedom. Concurrently, within the High Council, Valerius' power play encountered unexpected opposition. Counselor Lyra, an astute and independent voice, challenged his management of the Earth campaign and his brazen attempts to discredit Zorgan. She had reviewed the reports of the bioweapons' unanticipated consequences, the burgeoning unrest on the occupied territories. She suspected Valerius was exploiting the war for his personal enrichment. Lyra began to assemble allies, aiming to expose Valerius' corruption and to advocate for a more conciliatory approach to the conflict with Earth. She recognized that challenging Valerius would be perilous, but she believed that the very survival of the Imperium was at stake. The situation on Xylar Prime grew progressively unstable. Uprisings erupted in the streets, kindled by food shortages and the increasing number of fatalities from the war. The Imperial Guard struggled to maintain order, their ranks depleted by deployments to Earth and other theaters of conflict. Valerius, desperate to retain command, imposed martial law and unleashed the full force of the security apparatus on the protesters. But the crackdown served only to intensify the fires of rebellion. The people were no longer cowed. They had perceived the fissures in the Imperium's armor, the decay beneath the facade. Within his holding cell, Zorgan felt the tremors of the impending cataclysm. He understood that his words had ignited a flame that could either illuminate the path to reconciliation or engulf the Imperium in a bloody internecine war. He closed his eyes and beseeched guidance, the fortitude to endure whatever lay ahead. Valerius, sequestered in his lavish office, watched the pandemonium unfold on the holoscreens with mounting wrath. He had underestimated Zorgan's influence, the depth of the disaffection within the Imperium, that he knew that he had to act decisively to crush the insurgency before it spiraled beyond control. He summoned his loyalists, the commanders of the Imperial Guard, the heads of the security apparatus. He commanded them to employ any means necessary to restore order, to silence the dissidents, to eliminate Zorgan and his adherents. "This is no time for leniency," Valerius hissed. "This is a time for unwavering resolve. The Imperium's very survival depends on it." The seeds of insurgency had been planted. The tempest was gathering. The destiny of the Xylar Imperium hung precariously in the balance that a galaxy united. The Armistice ink was still tacky when President Anya Sharma stood before the resurrected capital, its alabaster facade a defiant gleam against the scarred horizon where the old city had crumbled. Fatigue was a persistent ache. Each diplomatic overture, each press conference, adding to the weight on her spirit. Yet, beneath the weariness, a spark of hope flickered stubbornly. Today, envoys from Earth and the fledgling Xylar Imperium, guided by the tentative but resolute Counselor Lyra, were to ratify a peace accord. It was a delicate construct, born from the ruins of a bioweapon catastrophe and the unlikely camaraderie between humanity and a rebellious Xylar admiral. Still, it was a genesis. "Madam President," David, her aide, murmured, his voice barely breaching her reverie. "Counselor Lyra is here." Anya composed herself, smoothing her jacket. She'd known Lyra only through comms, her image sharp and astute, her expression conveying a mirrored exhaustion. Face to face, Anya was taken by her youth. Lyra appeared no older than 30 Terran years. "Counselor Lyra," Anya greeted, extending a hand. "Welcome to Earth's embrace." Lyra's handshake was firm, her gaze direct. "President Sharma, my gratitude for the invitation." The signing was a carefully staged performance, each word and gesture scrutinized by a galaxy holding its collective breath. Anya spoke of Earth's tenacity, its unwavering devotion to amity. Lyra, in turn, voiced the Xylar Imperium's regret for past transgressions, pledging a novel course of accord and mutual understanding. As signatures dried, applause cascaded through the hall. Anya caught Lyra's gaze. a silent pact acknowledging the magnitude of the task ahead. Not an ending, but a tentative commencement. Later, Anya found herself within the sterile confines of a research facility outside what remained of Denver. Dr. Eris Thorne, eyes alight with near-fanatical intensity, awaited her. Thorne had become wholly consumed by Xylar technology, his quest for knowledge bordering on obsession. President Sharma, Thorne offered as greeting, barely acknowledging her presence before returning to the shimmering hologram before him. The data recovered from the Xylar flagship. It's simply breathtaking. Anya suppressed a sigh. While she valued Thorne's drive, his focus could blind him to the larger picture. Dr. Thorne, while I value your fervor, I must ask about the vaccine rollout. The pandemic still smolders in numerous regions. Thorne dismissed her with a wave. Distribution proceeds apace. But this, he indicated the hologram, could redefine everything. Xylar advances could revolutionize medicine, energy production, even interstellar voyaging. Anya approached, studying the projection. It outlined a Xylar warp drive, its web of energy conduits throbbing with simulated force. Are you suggesting we could traverse to other solar systems? More than merely traverse, Madam President, Thorne declared, his voice vibrant. We can explore, unearth new worlds, encounter new civilizations. A reality beyond Earth, a future where humanity isn't tethered to a single world. The notion was both exhilarating and frightening, the galaxy's immensity, the unknown perils lurking within. Yet Anya also glimpsed the promise of a fresh start, a chance to rebuild, assimilate, and flourish. I want you to assemble a team, she ordered, her tone resolute. Study this technology, comprehend it, adapt it to our purposes, but you will collaborate with Xylar scientists. This cannot be unilateral. Thorne nodded, his eyes blazing. Naturally, Madam President, collaboration is paramount. Anya allowed herself a small smile. Perhaps this unlikely partnership could yield something truly exceptional. Meanwhile, light years away on Xylar Prime, Admiral Zorgan sat incarcerated, the frigid metal a constant reminder of his fate. He was now branded a traitor, his reputation defiled by those who once celebrated him. Counselor Valerius had successfully portrayed him as a madman, a human pawn, his cautions dismissed as the ramblings of a shattered mind. But Zorgan knew the truth. He had witnessed the war's destruction, the suffering on both sides. He had seen humanity's spirit, their dedication to protecting their own. That he had come to believe that peace was not just possible, but crucial for shared survival. He'd hoped Lyra could sway the High Council, but Valerius's influence was too deeply entrenched. The propaganda machine churned relentlessly, stoking fear and animosity. Yet, even in his despair, Zorgan detected a subtle alteration. Guards bringing his meager sustenance seemed less antagonistic, their expressions betraying a hint of doubt. He caught snippets of dissent, citizens challenging Valerius's authority, whispers about the truth behind the conflict. Zorgan knew his words had not been entirely lost. Seeds of uncertainty had taken root. One evening, a guard furtively slipped him a datapad, his eyes darting about. Counselor Lyra sent this, he breathed. Be cautious. Zorgan activated the device. A message shimmered across the screen. Zorgan, the message began. We've secured a vote for your release, but Valerius obstructs us at every turn. We need proof of your claims, evidence of the Imperium's atrocities, something to sway the wavering counselors. Zorgan closed his eyes, his mind a whirlwind. He had witnessed countless brutalities over the years, yet they were buried in classified Imperium archives. How could he access them from his cell? Then, it struck him. The neural implant connecting him to the Imperium's network, supposedly disabled upon his imprisonment. But perhaps. He focused, reaching toward the dormant implant. A gamble. But he had nothing to lose. Back on Earth, Dr. Thorne was achieving astonishing progress. Collaborating with Xylar scientists who had sought asylum, he had deciphered key aspects of the warp drive. We're on the cusp of a breakthrough, Madam President, Thorne reported via secured channel. We foresee adapting the Xylar drive for human use within a year. Anya felt a rush of excitement. A year, an eternity, yet an instant in the grand narrative. Excellent, Dr. Thorne, she said, but emphasize safety. We cannot accept undue risks. Of course, Madam President, Thorne replied. Safety remains paramount. Still, Anya saw his impatience, the eagerness to transcend boundaries. She knew Thorne's motives were pure, but his fervor sometimes made her uneasy. Today, as Thorne continued his update, Anya received another message from Lyra. President Sharma. It read, "We've secured Zorgan's release. He has delivered irrefutable evidence of the Imperium's war crimes. The High Council is fracturing. Valerius loses his grip." Anya felt a wave of relief that Zorgan's sacrifice hadn't been futile. "We are positioned to negotiate a joint venture," Lyra continued. "A collaborative exploration of the Andromeda Galaxy. By joining forces, we showcase to the galaxy that peace is attainable." Anya smiled. Andromeda, a daring proposition, a beacon of hope for a future of coexistence. "Counselor Lyra, I accept," Anya replied. "Let us embark on this voyage together." The joint mission presented logistical pandemonium, harmonizing human and Xylar technologies, training crews to cooperate, navigating treacherous politics. Yet Anya and Lyra remained steadfast. They assembled a team of luminaries, scientists, engineers, diplomats, and explorers. Their vessel was christened Unity, embodying their shared commitment. Unity readied for its maiden flight. Anya addressed the crew. "We undertake a mission of remarkable significance," she proclaimed, her voice resounding. "We're not merely exploring a galaxy, we're forging a future where humanity and Xylar stand united as equals, allies, friends." The crew erupted in applause, their faces hopeful. Anya surveyed the diverse faces, human and Xylar, bound by a common purpose. The journey ahead would be arduous, replete with challenges and setbacks, but they were united. They had each other. As the Unity left Earth, Anya felt an optimism unknown for years. Earth had endured unimaginable suffering, stared down extinction, and emerged resilient. Now, Earth would claim its place, not as conqueror, but as a beacon of hope, a sign of what unfolds when species lay aside differences and strive toward a shared aim. The voyage to Andromeda would be protracted and perilous, but they were prepared to face any obstacle, together, prepared to craft a future where the galaxy wasn't bound by force, but by peace.